Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Noticing that a millionaire was throwing away a cupboard, the tramp decided to take it for himself. But looking inside MP4. It is now an unremarkable man living in an old, abandoned and dilapidated house, known in several neighboring villages as Matt. But once he was known by a different name, Mr. Matthew. He was referred to by grateful patients and respected physician colleagues. A rehabilitation physician, Matthew taught at the local university and had an extensive medical practice. People traveled to him from neighboring areas, as he had a reputation as a specialist who could get almost anyone doomed to a wheelchair back on their feet. But at one point life took a wrong turn. His beloved wife, as in a bad anecdote, was caught cheating with a friend who was a supervisor in the very hospital where Matthew worked, the head of the department. As a result of the scandal with his once beloved wife, the man found himself on the street, as the flat was inherited by his ex-wife from her parents. From the hospital he was survived by a former friend who now lived in a 4-room flat in the center, where Matthew and his wife used to live. All this broke the wounded and sensitive doctor, who lived with the certainty that if you live according to conscience, then fate will never turn to your unsavory side. Alcohol, detachment from life, and endless self-pity led him to an old house on the outskirts of the settlement, where he lived alone, not letting anyone from the city, where nothing else held him. He had gone to the region. As there in the village, it was possible to rent a small ramshackle house for a pittance. The proximity to nature and the absence of the noise of the crowd enticed him to choose his place of residence. He wanted to escape from everything from his past life, from acquaintances who were in it, even from himself. Alcohol entered his life tightly. Every day started with a glass of low-quality hot drink. At the beginning of his new life, he had money, the remnants of his former wealth, but soon his reserves began to run out. He moved out of his rented house to a long abandoned house on the outskirts. The locals said that a lonely old woman had lived there, and after her death the house was untouchable and stood boarded up. Of course, it was frequented by local boys looking for privacy and drunks looking for profit, but Mr. Matthew was able to keep it relatively tidy and fix what was broken. Fortunately, his hands were golden, though that talent had now dissolved into the addiction he had brought himself into. He supported his modest existence with occasional earnings from the locals, some to dig a vegetable garden, some to chop wood, and some to clean animal cages. At night, ashamed of himself, he would sneak through the woods to the rubbish dump adjacent to the expensive village where the cottages of the local elite of the city and region stood. Mr. Matthew lived on the outskirts of the settlement, through the woods, a kilometer and a half away from which was the local Rublevka. There was always something to be had in the rubbish dumps of this gated community, so Matthew was a frequent visitor there. When he saw the local oligarch throwing out a cupboard, Matthew was surprised, since when did the owners themselves, not the servants, take out the rubbish? And it was a good cabinet. Curiosity, natural wit, and instincts told him to keep his head down, not to reveal himself, but to wait until Mr. Stone left in his car. As soon as the car rounded the corner, Matthew ran out of his hiding place and ran to the cupboard. At first he thought he heard a groan, but when he opened the door, there was no longer any doubt. A young woman was lying in the cupboard, wounded and tormented. The moan was faint and was not repeated. But at first it seemed to the doctor that it was her last dying breath. As was his habit, he began to feel for a pulse. It was hard to feel, but there was one. The woman was close to death. She needed urgent medical attention. Her entire body was mutilated and she was barely breathing. Clearly she had been dumped for a reason, and clearly with no hope of anyone finding her while she was still alive. And Mr. Stone may simply not have realized that the woman was not yet dead and was desperately clinging to her last hope of life. Pictures of possible scenarios flashed rapidly through the man's mind. One thing remained constant: the oath he had taken, the doctor's oath. He could not leave this woman on a cold October evening here in this condition. Mr. Matthew knew perfectly well the routine of local life. No one was ever here on a Saturday night, and on Sunday mornings there was no cleaning, which meant no rubbish was thrown away. If he left it as it was, the woman's cold corpse would be discovered Monday afternoon, at the earliest. He wouldn't dare call for help either. And it's not even about the lack of money on his mobile phone, because he had been drinking heavily and once again, as had happened many times before, forgot to pay for the connection to call an ambulance or the police, but because to do so would be tantamount to signing the woman's death warrant. As soon as it turns out who threw out the cupboard with the surprise, then immediately the servants will run to inform the owner about what happened, and the woman will have no chance at all. There was no hope of a decent doctor or policeman. I would have to become a good Samaritan myself. Taking a breath and trying to calm himself down, Mr. Matthew pulled himself together and went to fetch his trolley, which he usually used to carry his fines. Today he would obviously be taking home something very different from what he had hoped for. Carefully, with all due caution, he began to move the body onto the trolley, but the woman still reacted instantly. Apparently the wounds were serious, and every touch caused pain throughout her body. The journey to the place Mr. Matthew was now forced to consider home was already a long one for an elderly man, and considering the weight of the burden, the journey took about 3 hours. As best he could, he wrapped the woman up to keep her warm from the cold, for he found her in a tank top and tights, if it could be called that. After what had happened to her, the clothes hadn't kept their original appearance either. All the way Mr. Matthew gingerly eyed his new problem, heard her moans and pondered what had happened. He thought the woman looked familiar to him, though anything was possible in this darkness, and given how much his new patient's face had been altered by the efforts of some sadist. Though there was little doubt that the name of the sadist was Mr. Stone. Finally reaching his lodgings, the doctor was able to exhale a little. It was unlikely that even if his ward was searched for, she would be found here. Now it remained to carefully examine the wounds and injuries, to assess what he could do at home, which was far from sterile, and what he would need to do it. The second issue was, of course, the acquisition of the drugs, materials, and devices he needed to help him. He had a small amount of money stashed away, but immediately the realization turned on that there was no way he could purchase it once, and in one place close to here. It's clear Mr. Stone wanted to get rid of the body. Either he figured the woman was already dead, or he didn't want to mess around and dumped her in sub-zero temperatures, and was sure that with her injuries she wouldn't survive the night. Either way, he would await news of the discovery of the corpse, and when that didn't happen, would seek information. And it was absolutely impossible to draw attention to himself. It was surprising that such an unusual, dangerous, and extraordinary case had, for the first time in years, stifled the urge to drink and feel sorry for himself. He only felt sorry for this young woman now, and he wanted to do everything he could to help her. Taking a closer look at her, he found nothing unusual during his examination. A woman of about 35, slim, even athletic, but all in all, nothing special. Mr. Matthew, like everyone else in the area, knew by sight the man who had dumped the cupboard, and he knew he didn't frequent the neighboring upscale community. Yes, he had bought himself the coolest plot of land with a huge modern cottage and access to the river. But as far as everyone knew, he was a rare guest in his house, and when he visited, he came with girls of a completely different type, young and beautiful. Not a single operation of cosmetological procedures, dressed in fashionable clothes, or rather even undressed according to the latest fashion. How accurate the rumors were, our Mr. Matthew didn't know, but it was said that the girls never repeated themselves. Mr. Stone always arrived with a new one. All in all, the situation seemed as strange and implausible as possible. But since he had taken the responsibility and the courage, there was nothing else to do. It was necessary to act. After some thought, Mr. Matthew made a list of all the essentials and thought about where to buy them without attracting attention. The first buses would be leaving soon, and it would be necessary to be among the first passengers so that he could go round all the points he had planned and buy everything he needed. He had already done what he could without the auxiliary materials. He has cut and carefully stripped the wretched woman of the remnants of her clothing, examined all her wounds. But it's clear that antibiotics, IVs, and cervical kits are needed here for even minimal care. And that's still with the hope that all he saw was a single injury, and there were no internal ones he couldn't help with under any circumstances. For now, all he could do was wash the wounds, treat them with vodka, something, and there was plenty of that goodness. For the rest, he would have to go as soon as possible. With one last look at the source of his new problems, he left the house. He wasn't able to return until the evening. I really hope my help is still relevant and the woman is alive, thought Mr. Matthew Pattison, although he did not find any swelling typical of internal injuries. but it was impossible to rule out that possibility. Plus, he didn't know that the victim might have been injected with something that would guarantee death before being thrown away. It was with a heavy heart that he walked from the bus stop to his house with a rucksack of everything he needed. Spent the last of his money on it. The last cord went to the shop and bought a basic set of groceries to feed his new patient. Of course, she won't be able to eat right away and won't be on nutrition, IVs and all the necessary things he took. But chicken broth is also a thing indispensable for those who need to recuperate. As soon as she starts to regain consciousness, it will be necessary to take care of her. Fortunately, Vasily Nikiforovich found the woman alive. The sheet he had covered her with was all bunched up. Sweat was beading on her forehead, clearly fever from the infection. Having quickly laid out everything necessary, the doctor began manipulations that could save her life. 2 weeks passed in care and aspirations for the patient. He did not drink a drop of alcohol. During this time, he slept intermittently. As the woman had one crisis followed by another, he was afraid to leave her side. The situation stabilized only on the 16th day. During all this time, he did not hear a single word from his ward. Only moans and quiet mumbling and delirium during the first nights when the situation was at its most critical. The patient opened her eyes, suddenly, and staring at the back of the man who had saved her with horror. The doctor turned round at the feeling of someone looking intently at him, and almost jumped, startled by the fear in her eyes. "Hush. I didn't hurt you. I am helping you. Don't worry," he spoke, panting. Vasily Nikiforovich saw many different patients who were unlucky in life and who were brought to his office by the curves of their fate. They were both victims of car accidents and victims of crime, but he could not remember such eyes. He physically felt pain from that look, as if the whole world had been destroyed in front of his patient's eyes, and that pain was bursting out through the look. From then on, they existed in silence. The patient did not speak at all. The doctor tried to talk to her, but it was all in vain, and he stopped. He did everything he could to make her well enough to get back on her feet. Compresses, drips, gymnastics, exercises, nutrition. He gave her everything, devoted himself to her life, found a new meaning to his existence. He thanked himself for the fact that, despite his pernicious addiction to alcohol, he was able to keep in himself the habit of thrift and had some savings for a rainy day. He also did not drink the only valuable thing. He still owned an ancient cross with a chain, which he had inherited from his mother. He sold it when the money ran out and his patient needed a huge amount of money for rehabilitation and care. He once thought he would be found dead with this cross. He would never give it up or sell it under any circumstances. This object was the one thing that connected him to his past life, where Mr. Matthew Pattison was a respected man, an associate professor in a department, deputy head of a hospital department, a loving and beloved husband and son. But how did his life change the day he returned from the hospital to collect a patient's chart he had been working on at home and found his wife and friend? That day, when he became an accidental witness to a crime, all his ideas about life, his principles and meanings all abruptly vanished somewhere. Now he was happy to sell the cross and do good. It seemed impossible to do otherwise. All the while the doctor was selflessly doing his work, remembering all the things he tried to forget. His patient looked at him and watched him with beautiful gray-green eyes. She looked at him every second he was with her. It was evident that the grief she remembered was so great that she could not bring herself to speak, in spite of all the kindness and warmth she received every day from her savior. One day, having finished his gymnastics with the patient, Mr. Matthew Pattison went to boil her some chicken broth. Despite the already protracted period of rehabilitation and the excessive care and guardianship, the woman was still in an extremely weak state. When the doctor returned with a plate of flavorful chicken broth on a tray, he was surprised. His patient usually dozed off after the grueling physical exertion she needed to rehabilitate her condition. But here she looked at him with wide-open eyes full of tears and suddenly said, "I've lost a child." Mr. Pattison almost knocked over a bowl of hot soup in surprise. Keeping his composure, he found the strength to place the plate carefully on the stool that served as his nightstand and table at the same time. "I'm sorry for your loss," said the doctor with a sigh. "I'm sorry I examined you, but you were not abused. Nor was there any sign that you had a miscarriage. I don't know what else to say." He continued to stare intently and sympathetically at the stranger who had become his dearest person, the meaning of his hitherto meaningless life. Paying no attention to the reaction and words of her interlocutor, Returning to the emptiness inside herself, she continued. Oh yeah. She was 2 months old, sudden infant death syndrome. I've been cursed since that day. Although she spoke detachedly and without emotion, large tears rolled down her cheeks in hailstones after she finished her sentence. Mr. Patterson realized that her little girl, her daughter, had died of sudden infant death syndrome, a phenomenon about which little is known in modern science. Simply a baby under a year-old stops breathing and dies. The causes of this phenomenon have not yet been discovered. As a doctor, he realized that the woman was in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder. Apparently, one terrible psychological trauma was superimposed on another, no less dangerous for the psyche and for health in general. Having realized that it was pointless to answer, as the patient could not hear him and was talking to herself, he simply put his hand on her arm. Surprisingly, the patient jerked in surprise, lowered her gaze, but did not remove his hand. It was their first conversation, an attempt at communication. A fragile thread of trust began to form. And for his part, Mr. Matthew Patterson was making a great effort not to cut it off, but to strengthen it, without outwardly showing emotion or curiosity. He was sinking more and more into speculation as to what had happened. All that was known was that his patient had been pregnant, had given birth to a child, and 2 months later her daughter had died of sudden infant death syndrome. The second was that his patient had been horribly beaten, abused, and mutilated. This was done by a man with a clearly disturbed psyche who enjoyed it all, judging by the nature of the injuries. It appears that they tried to kill her, and perhaps even thought they had killed her. Thirdly, she was brought in her huge jeep to the dump by the local town landlord, a very rich and powerful man called Mr. John Stone, and threw her out like a dog. How interconnected is all of this? Whether and what these events had to do with each other, no one knew, except the silent patient herself. As the labor of curing and nursing became less strenuous and ceased to occupy all Mr. Patterson's thoughts, he began to think more and more about the situation that had occurred. No matter how hard he tried to piece together a coherent story that would more or less explain everything, nothing worked. He would never question a patient in such a state. It could definitely harm her, have a negative impact on both her physical and psycho-emotional state. It could destroy the fragile trust that had been built up between them, and then it would have been impossible to get her to talk, and the rehabilitation period would have increased many times over. So we just had to be patient and wait. A few weeks after the rescued woman spoke of her daughter. Not a word but thank you as he fed her and changed her clothes did the doctor hear from her. Sometimes it seemed like forever. More than 2 months had passed since that October night when Mr. Patterson had picked her up at the dumpster. It was the 14th of December on the calendar. The doctor carefully tore off the sheets each morning to keep track of the passage of time. Since his life had taken another turn and changed course, he had picked up many new habits, and some were simply resumed from a past life, like keeping a calendar and shaving every day. Standing at the sink, he performed his morning routine. He tore off a calendar page, starting a new day, and began to prepare everything he needed for shaving. Suddenly a voice sounded behind him, the timbre and sound of which he had already forgotten. Today is my daughter, Mia's, birthday. Today would have been her 1-year birthday. A year ago on this day, I was the happiest woman in the world. All I can think about is what I did wrong to make my life turn from the peak of my happiness to absolute misery. But even at this point, the torrent of unhappiness has not left me. Mr. Matthew Patterson had long ago decided that when she spoke, he would be sure to ask her what her name was and introduce himself. Regardless of what she said or how offhanded his remark would be, he was tired of addressing her to himself as either patient or unfortunate. Even thought about giving her some sort of name to call her by, but changed his mind, finding it disrespectful. Taking a breath for courage and gathering his wits, he blurted out the text he had prepared in his head weeks ago and kept repeating to himself. My name is Mr. Matthew Patterson. That was my name back in the day, and I was a doctor in a rehab center. Now I'm mostly just Matt, an alcoholic who has slipped to the point of being homeless. On the night of 9/10 October, I found you in a dumpster in the town of Sviblov, where I saw you brought and dumped by Mr. John Stone. From that day on, I did everything I could to keep you alive, and I'm glad I helped you. How are you feeling? What's your name? He seemed to forget how to breathe when he said it. He said it without turning to her, fearing he wouldn't be able to say anything if he saw those eyes full of pain. Counting to 10, he decided it was time to turn round and see the reaction his words produced. But as soon as he turned round, she spoke. "I realize that I am now indebted to you. I don't think I'm fully recovered yet. Not mentally, not physically. I realize that you are very interested to know my story, how what happened that led me to the rubbish dump where you rescued me. Please give me a little more time. I think I've just been able to start formulating something about and for myself. I'll be sure to tell you everything if you want me to." But a little later she said in a quiet and surprisingly calm voice, "My name is Mary," she added quietly. The pleased Mr. Matthew Pattison could not find anything to say to her, but only smiled softly and quietly. It seemed to him that this would be the best way to show that he was not rushing her and was willing to wait until she was ready. Their life and communication had changed somewhat since then. They were still able to exchange a few everyday phrases of politeness. Mary began to get out of bed and to sit for long periods in a chair by the window, looking out, but she did not express any desire to get out of the house to get some air. Mr. Pattison understood that psychologically his house had become a place of strength for her, a place of refuge from all adversity, and she could not bring herself to leave it in such a state, even for a short walk. With the same calmness and in the same good-natured atmosphere, they celebrated the new year. Since there was no television in the house, there was a library of works of Russian and foreign classics. That's what the occasional neighbors did on long winter evenings, sit and read books. When Mr. Pattison went out of the house to the local village shop, he always overheard idle conversations that he had never cared for before. He felt that Mr. Stone must be looking for Mary dead or alive. This was very disturbing, for the doctor realized that he had no resources to protect her. One evening of the New Year's holiday, once again the power went out, and Mary, quite unexpectedly for Mr. Pattison, and for herself as well, which was noticeable, began to talk to him. "You know, I've always been a good girl from a good family. I was given the usual future in my circle marriage to a nice bloke from our circle, a couple of children. Everything probably should have gone according to plan, for I was not distinguished by a cheerful temperament and the typical exuberant adolescence of teenagers. I went to grammar school, went to art and music school, came home to a loving mom and dad, and no scandals, no arguments, no fights. I read about such things in newspapers and saw in popular talk shows. But there were no such problems among my acquaintances. No one drank or cheated. Everyone around me respected and loved each other. We spent all our holidays together," Mary continued. "Mom didn't work. She did the housework, but not to the detriment of her development. Dad could afford to support us and the domestic helpers. We didn't have excessive consumption or golden toilets, as was fashionable at the time. In general, a quiet existence of a cell of society. Everything collapsed at one moment, when my mummy was given a terrible diagnosis, protecting me to the end, despite my older teenage years. My parents did not inform me of it and hid everything to the last, citing fatigue and autumn moping. Mum was thinning, her face gaunt. She cut her gorgeous curly hair into a short man's haircut. Even then, it didn't make me suspicious. I guess it was because I was raised in safety and didn't feel the need to overshadow my childhood and adolescence. Mum's death I had to accept and feel not like Dad's in 6 months, but at an accelerated pace in a week, namely 6 days. It became pointless and impossible to hide it. Mum was taken to a hospice for palliative care. There was no hope. Lung cancer. Mum and Dad never smoked, though. Such a mockery of fate. And the first blow for me personally is that everything around me is not perfect," Mary said bitterly. Fortunately, if I may say so, about the death of another person, however inevitable it was, Mummy did not suffer much and left quickly. Daddy and I rallied around the loss of a loved one. It's now I realize how lucky I was then. It could have gone much worse. But fate, having struck me, seemed to wave to me again with a smile. Again, everything went according to the scenario that was prepared for me from birth. I graduated from school and entered the faculty of teaching at the university without any problems. What bad choice for a girl from a good family. Mary grinned with a chuckle. A classic. And of course, it was not about a grandiose career in the field of national pedagogy. I was supposed to be able to work to earn my own petty cash, or at least have the knowledge to raise my own children adequately and thoroughly, Mary said. In her sophomore year, Kyle came into her life, positive from every angle. an engineer whose career was gaining momentum. Mary's dad and his family were thrilled with their union. Young, healthy, happy. Their whole lives ahead of them. What more could you ask for? In her 4th year, she got married. Everything was going according to plan. Another blow took Mary by surprise. A year and a half after the wedding, when she graduated from university, and they began to work closely on planning the expansion of their still small family, no one had diagnosed her with infertility. But a whole professor, a medical doctor, explained that she would have difficulty conceiving and carrying a child on her own. It was a thunderbolt. Where would such problems come from? Mary was outraged. The pre-pregnancy treatment process took 4 years. I lived in clinics, antenatal clinics, hospitals. I don't think there was a doctor I didn't consult. I flew to Germany and Israel. Everything was fine with Kyle, and IVF was recommended to me. Despite my never-ending desire to have a baby, I adamantly denied hormonal stimulation until I found out Kyle had started cheating on me. A young intern at his firm. That's when I realized I cared more about my family and decided to take the risk. I never told Kyle I found out about his cheating. What's the point? We're all good at psychology now. Back then, I went to endless counseling sessions and worked through my issues. And I was sure without a doubt that this cheating was a realization of masculinity, an attempt to prove that he was capable of anything, a manifestation of masculine dignity. I am still grateful to him for going with me all the way, all the clinics, all the procedures and ultrasounds. At all important stages, Kyle was always with Mary. After the final decision to undergo IVF, Kyle even broke up with his young mistress. He endured Mary's whims and tantrums, 2 failed IVF attempts, tears and sobs. 1 pregnancy just didn't happen. The second time, the embryo stopped developing in the 6th week of pregnancy. 3 weeks of happiness from the moment I found out I was pregnant to the ultrasound when I was told the baby was gone, Mary said. It feels like being thrown from the 10th floor onto the tarmac. Even breathing is unbearably painful. It feels like everything inside, all the bones are broken. Third attempt. Mary prayed to all the gods and put candles to all the saints. I think I prayed day and night, and in my sleep, she recalled. The pregnancy came and went well until the 4th month. Early in the morning, I woke up with an unbearable pain in my lower abdomen, a miscarriage. How I survived it, I don't even remember. I remember the IVs and the worried faces of my dad, Kyle, and his parents. I know you want to judge Kyle for having an affair, Mary continued. But even if he was to blame, the support and love he gave me at that time in my life made it all worth it. On top of that, my health was pretty badly compromised by the amount of drugs and hormones I was taking. I had to accept that there would be no more IVF courses, and that Mary would have to undergo a rather difficult period of rehabilitation. She spent 4 months in a regional boarding house where she was treated and recuperated. Again, a big thank you to my family for their support, Mary said. Thanks to them, I began to slowly come round and find the strength to move on with my life. The day before Mary was discharged, Kyle's parents were involved in a car accident. The terrible accident, caused by a drunk driver, took the lives of 2 people who had become her family. Kyle's mother, Mrs. Jennifer, was so affectionate, caring and understanding to Mary that in a way she replaced her own mother. For a year after their deaths, Mary and Kyle existed on autopilot. He went to work, she did something around the house. There were some chores and worries. But they never seemed to laugh once in the entire year, sullen and tired from all the hardships. That's how I would describe this period of my life, Mary recalled. The day passed, and well. Every day, I lay in the darkness of the marital bedroom where Kyle and I had once shared many beautiful moments, with only a thin ray of light shining through the tightly drawn curtains. I hardly ate, read anything, or turned on the huge plasma TV on the wall. I lay in the semi-darkness of the room and thought about nothing. I tried not to let a single thought enter my head, because then each one would echo with unbearable pain in my wounded heart and make me feel even worse. Kyle would leave for work every morning and return exactly 40 minutes after the end of the workday, which was the amount of time it took to get from work to home. He would return and lie down on the couch in the living room. Mary would lie in the bedroom, and he would lie in the living room. Once in a while, they would exchange the necessary household phrases, and that was all. Kyle was a shadow of the man Mary had married, and she was no better. It was as if they had gone into hibernation, into anabiosis, to try as much as possible to preserve, to accumulate all the vitality they had left after all their troubles. Sometimes it seemed like forever, that Mary and Kyle could never bring themselves to go back to their past lives. Suddenly one evening, Kyle didn't go straight to his favorite couch after coming home from work, but went into the bedroom and talked to Mary, which was surprising in itself. "We can't go on like this," Kyle said. "We have us, and we should thank the Almighty for that. Yes, after all the losses we've suffered, the pain that has come over us, it's not easy to go back to our past lives, but we have to try, for the sake of my mother's and father's memory, and for the sake of our unborn son." Then it became clear that this was not a sudden monologue as Mary had initially thought. At lunchtime, in order to keep communication with his colleagues to a minimum, Kyle began to visit a psychologist who had an appointment in the same business center, where Kyle's firm was located. "I have to admit, his words had a profound effect on me," Mary recalled. "I had never looked at the situation from the point of view that I would be ashamed in front of my family and friends who are not around. But what a life I lead. Sort of in remembrance of them, I became very ashamed of my mother, and of Mrs. Jennifer, my mother-in-law, and of my son, whom I couldn't even bury. That sudden evening dialogue with Kyle and then therapy with a psychoanalyst helped us a lot." Mary and Kyle began to come back to life. Yes, slowly, but it was already a huge step. On the recommendation of the psychologist the two of them started seeing, they decided to go on holiday. Given the life they had been leading for the last year, and to be honest, Mary personally for the last 3, they realized they needed a reboot. It seemed that the sea air and sunshine would help rehabilitate their emotional state. "If I had known how this trip was going to end, I would have been better off killing myself straight away," Mary said. "Why do grief and unhappiness come at a time when you are happy? The highest point of life satisfaction is followed by absolute and unbearable unhappiness." They decided to fly to Italy. They spent a long time choosing hotels, excursions and leisure activities that kept them busy and distracted them from their usual thoughts. Finally, everything was ready. Making their own travel arrangements distracted and mobilized them. Mary and Kyle began to socialize more, talking more than out of sheer necessity. The holiday started off beautifully. They did a lot of walking, sunbathing, swimming, touring local attractions, and even socializing with other tourists. It was amazing how each day the ice wall between them grew thinner and thinner. They shut off from the rest of the world by the dome, began to film it for the rest of the world and for each other. It was as if they were on their honeymoon. Mary and Kyle were getting reacquainted with each other, holding hands, needing each other. Another evening after the tour was spent at a fancy restaurant. After a delicious dinner and a few glasses of delicious Italian wine, Mary and Kyle decided to end the evening with a walk along the beach. They walked and enjoyed the sea, the unbearably beautiful sunset, and each other's long-forgotten company. They seemed to remember why they loved each other and began to realize that they were not ready to give up what was between them and what was still possible in the future. The breathtakingly beautiful tale of that night ended expectantly with intimacy. They hadn't been together since the night Mary lost the baby. It was a night of love and magic. It seemed like that magic would last forever. That night changed everything. They returned from their holiday a different person, not even the same person who was then expecting a baby, a long-awaited baby. After so many years of waiting and failed attempts, renewed versions of new happiness, they couldn't get enough of each other, and it seemed that the world consisted of the two of them. No one else was needed. They were happy absolutely and unconditionally. A month after they returned from Italy, Mary was flying on the wings of love. And so was Kyle. She'd never seen him so happy. The morning sickness caught her off guard. She was completely unprepared for it. Her mind just collapsed. The thought of being pregnant was something she just hadn't allowed for. She was prepared immediately for the worst. The certainty that she would be taken by the disease that was coming for her mother became her obsession. The neurosis was getting worse, and she kept winding herself up. Mummy had a hereditary form of cancer, and I refused to take tests and markers to find out if I had got this genetic bomb, because I was afraid of going mad when I heard the disappointing diagnosis, Mary recalled, plus hormone therapy and support for IVF. I couldn't think of anything good. I was sure I was dying. She forced herself to go to the doctor just to find out how much time she had left. I wanted to prepare Kyle for another loss. She wanted to finish all the things she'd started, to take stock of her life. She rejected the treatment right away, even without a doctor's consultation. I saw how hard Mummy had to go, despite the expensive and painful treatment. How she suffered, Mary said. I didn't want to torture myself, Kyle, and my dad. Making my father go through this a second time. Unbearable and unimaginable. She spent a long time going to her GP to be referred to a more specialist based on her test results for a consultation. Twice she canceled the appointment, and once she ran right out of the lobby of the private health clinic where she had an appointment. Fear haunted Mary every day. She felt worse and worse. The nausea wouldn't let up. The only thing that made her gather all her remaining strength and go to the doctor was when her husband Kyle became suspicious and asked her how she was feeling. By the time she talked to him and had a final explanation, she wanted to know all the details and timelines. God only knew what she was going through and how to muster the courage and strength to walk into the doctor's office. She sank down on the chair in front of him and cried. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. For about 15 minutes they tried to calm her down and give her water so that she could tell him what she had come in with. When the tears finally stopped and the sedative drops had taken effect, she said to the doctor in a quiet voice, I am dying and I want to know when. I think the doctor himself was taken aback. Such patients apparently were not often in his competence. Now I even think that he wanted to escort her to the other wing of the clinic, where private psychiatry was located. Pulling himself together, the doctor began to question her about the symptoms of her mysterious illness. After listening to her to the end, the doctor gave her a full-mouth smile, which she found extremely offensive. I actually came for a terminal diagnosis and was planning to pass away soon, Mary said. Continuing to smile, the doctor opened his desk drawer and started rummaging through it. After a few seconds, he placed a rapid pregnancy test in front of her and said, I think you should take the test to determine your due date more accurately. I recommend you take a HCG blood test. But based on your symptoms and some of the outward signs I'm seeing, I'm willing to bet my head that you're pregnant. That's the last thing she remembered. Next thing you know, she's waving a fan and smelling a pungent odor. Turns out she fainted. Mary never for a second allowed herself to think she might be pregnant. Firstly, the initial difficulties with conception she later recalled, plus the diagnosis. Secondly, even the treatment didn't help us. Mom's medical history, our long-term depression. Mary could have suspected anything, but certainly not pregnancy. The doctor wouldn't risk letting her go into the ladies' room alone. He gave her a nurse to accompany her. She couldn't go on her own. She used to think that like a bag of dust was a beautiful phraseology, but it really wasn't. A very understandable condition for her now. Overwhelming to the extreme, the mixture of feelings and emotions that came over her was simply inexpressible in words. 10 minutes later, they were back in the office. The nurse practically carried her on her back, for her legs were almost weakened with joy. I'm pregnant, Mary said. A complex range of feelings and emotions. She was immediately given an ultrasound and heard her baby's heartbeat for the first time. As it turned out, it was timely, given her diagnosis, previous problems with conception, and the course of the pregnancy. The decision was made to put her in hospital for preservation. She will never forget Kyle's emotion and voice when she called him from the ambulance and said, I need some personal items as I'm being put on conservatorship. Pause. A few rhetorical questions, and then screaming, crying, and exclamations of absolute happiness. He reached the hospital at the same time as she was being taken by ambulance. How happy he was. It wasn't until a few days later that Mary realized their happiness. Although her pregnancy had not been easy, she had been kept in labor. Toxicosis plagued her throughout her pregnancy. Every other day she was given very painful drips, from which all the veins disappeared. But it was nothing. She was absolutely and infinitely happy. A month and a half later, they found out they were having a girl and immediately decided on the name Mia. Mia was a beautiful and holy name, like a patron saint for their little girl's amulet. Kyle ran around the baby shops and seemed to have bought up the entire range: 2 cots, several prams, tons of toys, and everything needed to care for a baby. When he visited her at the hospital every day after work, they laughed that if this kept up, they would have to buy a new flat to store all the goodies he had acquired. In the 38th week of her pregnancy, her stomach began to pull unbearably. and Mary asked her obstetrician-gynecologist to be the one to call, even though it was night time. Despite the happiness that enveloped her, the anxiety wouldn't let go. All the negative experiences and all the previous losses were weighing on her, even though she was careful to keep them away. Knowing her, their history, Kyle and her father, the doctor flew to the hospital 20 minutes later, did a cursory examination and said, "It is necessary to perform an emergency C-section. There is life-threatening danger to both you and your daughter." Mary made the decision not to bother either her husband or her dad, to resign herself to fate and tell the facts their nerves and worry would change nothing, but only hurt the staff and themselves. At 6:05, Mary became a happy mom, the most beautiful daughter in the world. 51 centimeters, 3 kilograms and 60 grams. "My happiness just couldn't fit inside me," she said. If there is an infinite, dimensionless and absolute happiness in life, she experienced it then. That day at the discharge from the maternity hospital, her father furtively wiped away tears, and her husband cried and was not even going to hide it. It seems that this moment was the happiest in the life of each of them. It took them more than 2 hours to get home, because Kyle was driving 20 kilometers per hour in the leftmost lane and refused to increase the speed. Happiness was new to them. They went to it for so long, fought so hard for it, that they simply could not lose it and did everything to prevent it from happening. As it turned out, it was in vain. Their fate reminded them again that not everything is in their hands, that nothing depends on them. All their control and attempt to manage life processes is an empty endeavor. On the 16th of February, when their daughter Mia was 2 months and 2 days old, she did not wake up. She simply forgot how to breathe and her heart stopped. There are no words to describe their grief. Just as there were no words to describe their happiness when she was born, there are absolute grief now. It is hard to imagine the existence of a person whom Mary would wish to go through it. Nor had they gone through it, not her, not Kyle, not her father. They crawled because it broke them not in half, but into hundreds of millions of little pieces. They were all together. They had only them in the whole world, and the center of their world was their baby, their little Mia. With her gone, it was as if the magnet that pulled the three of them together around her was gone. The pain of her leaving was unbearable and unending. And it wasn't just her they'd lost. They began to lose each other and themselves. "Mr. Matthew, it's morning," Mary stammered. "Do you want to know the whole story now?" He could not answer at once. He sat and furtively wiped away his tears. He didn't have children, as it happened, but the way Mary told it, the way she looked at him, it would have moved a stone. Mr. Matthew was in a lot of pain and fear. He realized that this was not the end. After all, there was something else that had brought her to the ill-fated junkyard in the boot of the local authorities' car. "Mary, I don't want to force you to do anything," the doctor finally found himself. "As you see fit, based on your feelings." "All right, then I'll tell you the whole story at once. It won't hurt me anymore. I was already dead then, that morning of the 16th of February. A silence fell over them. Mary was gathering her thoughts to continue her monologue, and Mr. Matthew was thinking what a scoundrel he was. He dared to feel sorry for himself. "Oh my God," he reasoned to himself. "How could you, a healthy grown man, break down like that over such a trifle, such a trifle?" The woman left. So what? She cheated, she betrayed him, her friend betrayed her. And what did you do better for anyone? Maybe to yourself that after that you started betraying yourself, drowning in your grief at the bottom of a bottle. He looked at his life from the outside and was horrified at what had broken him. He felt so sorry for himself. Is it really true? His self-abuse was interrupted by Mary's voice. 16th February. Yes, but that was the day my life collapsed. It's terrible that I remember every detail, every second, like in slow motion. As a psychiatrist later explained to me, this phenomenon is called psyche, a special neurological condition that can be caused, among other things, by a particularly traumatic situation. Oh yeah, that was the situation. And it couldn't get any worse. Mary remembered everything. The eyes of the ambulance doctor, the tears of the nurse, the sympathetic apology of the police officers who had to question them about the circumstances of the incident. She remembered the report the medical examiner had given them and his lengthy explanation that no one was insured. It happens. And so they entered this sad but commonplace statistic. The hardest for Mary was the moment of the funeral. She remembered her mum's funeral, her mother-in-law's funeral, and her father-in-law's funeral. But her daughter's death hurt deeply then, terribly intense pain. But these were people who had lived a life. As she stood over the grave, which was tiny with a small headstone, all in flowers and toys, it shouldn't be like that. It was impossible for it to be like that. Like Mary had said, after the funeral, which with their troubles had kept them at least somewhat together and forced them to coordinate and talk, Dad, Kyle and her had withdrawn into themselves. They had simply become strangers to each other. With Kyle, each was living their own grief and no one wanted to share it, each protecting it from the other. We didn't talk to my husband about our daughter's death after her funeral, Mary said. I don't know what we were thinking, that it might smooth things over. That silence was the answer. Dad would call sometimes asking how we were. Yes, how we were. We were alive and we weren't happy about it. That's how we were. The cruelty and injustice was killing me. I was given and immediately taken away, as if some sadist was having fun with me in secret. We spent 2.5 months in silence. Kyle took a holiday and sat on the couch like he did then, and Mary lay in her bedroom with the blinds drawn. All the happiness we'd been given had taken more than we'd given, ripped it out with a piece of heart. Then we existed like that for a year. I realized I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to be the naive person who hopes again and goes after a phantom dream. I realized I had to break it off. I called my father and asked his permission to stay at his house in Seattle, a remote gated community where no one cares about anyone. Perfect for a voluntary hermit. I remember gaining the strength to talk to my husband. It was much calmer than I expected. Maybe we just didn't have the energy to make a scene, to be nervous, to worry. Kyle, I want to leave. I can't go on like this, I said. You're a very good man, and I'll always be grateful for everything we've had, for your help in those moments of happiness. I no longer want to wait for happiness like manna from heaven, to enjoy it, and then physically feel that I have to recover again from grief, from myself, from everyday worries after another disaster. It's petty, selfish, and cowardly. But I want to escape from everything, including myself. Please give me that opportunity. Without judging me, let me go. And he let go. Thank him for that. He didn't push me, he didn't beg me. I couldn't take it, I couldn't resist. I just didn't have the strength for it. That's how I ended up here in this village. Mary was silent, and for the first time since she had begun to share the tragic story of her life with a complete stranger, she stood up. She went to the cooker, lit the gas, and poured water into the kettle. Would you like tea or coffee? She asked. Yes, please, Mary. Tea, Mr. Matthew Pattison said almost immediately. He realized that she had passed one milestone and was preparing for the second. According to her, of course, nothing could be worse than her daughter's death. And there was no arguing with that. What happened to her, however, happened to her. Somehow she herself had ended up dying in a rubbish dump, and someone had done it to her. And he was sure that this pain had not yet subsided either, and had brought her huge scars on her heart that had just begun to heal. The old man's heart clenched at the memory of the condition in which he had found her, and how much effort he had put in, so that now, nearly 4 months later, Mary could stand and walk unsupported. Mary, standing over the kettle, thought for a moment. She was working out in her head the chronology and the important details of what she wanted to tell this kind old man, how she had ended up in the unfortunate cellar, and how she had pretended to be dead to survive against all odds. The kettle whistled on the cooker and made Mary snap out of her reverie, out of the thoughts that plagued her. Removing the kettle from the cooker, she stirred the boiling water into mugs, poured the brew, and, limping slightly, went to the table, placing a cup in front of Mr. Matthew Pattison. She went on to recount what had happened to her. As you probably know, real estate is extremely expensive in Seattle, and there are only a few houses where people live all year round, Mary said. Mostly everyone comes on weekends or holidays. And then there are the security guards who walk around the community in these gated homes where the owners have deemed their presence necessary, and the endless house helpers. When I arrived with 1 suitcase of belongings and 2 bags of groceries, I heard a ringing silence, no voices or sounds, and therefore no people. It was what I needed in the state of mental turmoil I was in. Dad called me every day at first. Apparently he was very worried that I might do something to myself. But every day my voice got more cheerful, and I guess that calmed him down. At first, he kept threatening to come over, or at least to send Jess, his constant housekeeper, to help me clean up the house. There hadn't been anyone for over a year, as my father only came up there on holiday to fish in the quiet of the river. He missed this year's holiday because he was with me all the time. I was in hospital at the time, and he came and entertained me. I arrived, and for the first few days I started tidying up and general cleaning on my own. Things that Jess hadn't had time to clean in the few days that Daddy allotted her, giving her an ultimatum that he was going fishing. The quiet and physical activity began to heal me little by little. Seemingly daily, tired from doing so many things, I stopped hearing my incessant thoughts and had a dialogue with my inner self. This was what was needed when the housework was over. The only entertainment left was books. Dad had moved the entire home library here. I realized what I was missing. When I wore myself out physically, my body channeled all its resources into recovery. And I had no time to think. As I said at the beginning, my parents were very active in developing me as a child, taking me to music and art school. But sport for a girl at that time seemed secondary and optional. There was never a place for serious physical activity in my life, and I decided to fix it. And one May day, the weather was sunny and warm. And I put on shorts, a t-shirt and trainers, and went jogging for the first time. At first, my jogging around the village might have made the occasional spectator laugh. Fortunately, there were none. I ran for a couple of minutes and gasped, then walked for 10 minutes as I had no energy to run. But I didn't give up. Every day I increased the pace and the amount of exertion. For one reason, I was exhausting myself, and at night I fell asleep without dreams, which constantly haunted me, not allowing me to rest even a few hours. I had no dreams, no nightmares, and no creepy night thoughts during bouts of insomnia. For this I was ready to run and run even faster and even further. Now every day, regardless of the weather or how I felt, started with a run. I ran without looking back, as if I wanted to run away from my past and was very afraid that it would catch up with me. For the rest of May, summer and September, every day was like the other. I would get up in the morning and run through the village along the riverbank, through the forest. No matter how I felt, no matter what weather was waiting outside my window. I would come from my run and read something that had helped me with all my problems since childhood. I would read books and enter another world where there was no me, no my problems. There was a whole other world that I could escape to from all the hustle and bustle. If I felt I wasn't too tired, I would force myself to go out for an evening jog, all just to get through the evening and get through the night. And then the morning. A new day, as they say, the day is done. And thank goodness for that. And that's how I climbed through my life, from one week to the next. And I was grateful for that. I didn't stop being sick, but somehow I lived. I found a way to live. Running hardened and strengthened not only my body, but also my spirit. I had never seen such muscles. I lost a lot of weight and muscles were showing all over my body. My stamina surprised me. I was running 20 kilometers a day, and when I ran, I didn't think about anything. It was as if running was my natural form of existence. And if I didn't run, I would fall and die. I couldn't run without it, like I couldn't breathe. The only one of my rare interlocutors was my dad, who no longer called every day but still steadily dialed me once a week to make sure everything was okay. Kyle didn't call me, but a couple of times my dad said my husband called him to check on me. I was eternally grateful to him for being so sensitive and respectful of my request, for preserving the little world I'd created for myself. Sometimes it was very rare for me to leave the gates of the village to go to the shop, and I made do with really little. I shopped at the local small shop on the territory of the settlement. There were two cheerful saleswomen, Meg and Zoe. They tried to talk to me, but gave up, as did the security guys at the checkpoint. I occasionally exchanged a few words with them when I ran past, or on the rare trips out of the grounds. But my main interlocutor was a guard at one of the houses on our street. Mr. Tom, as I had called him since my youth when we bought the house, was an extremely good-natured and quiet, non-elderly man. It is unlikely that his function for the last 10 years was really security. I think the landlord didn't want to dismiss him out of sentimental feelings, and I think Mr. Tom had nowhere else to go. He lived in a small house on the edge of the property, in a hut behind the guest house. Mr. Tom was known for his tact and unobtrusiveness. Perhaps even my father had alerted him to my condition. He kept in touch with him too. Occasionally he'd invite him round for some small jobs. Be that as it may, over the months the not-so-young guard became the person I interacted with the most. A calm and modest man, non-drinker. Contrary to stereotypes, he smiled and greeted me kindly, but never insisted on conversation, though he was happy to keep it going if I stopped to talk. On the very day that you, Mr. Matthew Pattison, found me on the rubbish bin, I took a little rest after lunch and went out for a second run, thinking I wasn't tired enough. I had never run to music. I needed complete silence and no associations, which only made for unnecessary thoughts, which is what I was trying to avoid. Putting on leggings and a t-shirt, I thought it would be chilly even with the intense running, and threw on a windbreaker. As soon as I stepped out of the gate and closed it behind me, I saw Mr. Tom standing in the road looking around. With a quick step to warm up for the run, I walked up to him. "Mr. Tom, what's the matter?" I asked. "Oh, the car gave me a fright." Mr. Tom turned round abruptly, apparently lost in his own thoughts. "Did you see it?" "Mr. John Stone's here," he said. "I don't even know who that is," I wondered. "You don't know who he is?" The old man was surprised. "His house is right by the river, and the fence is so close to the lake that you can't walk along the shore. Though it is forbidden, though he is not allowed to do it." "Of course," I said. "Indeed, there is a house at the end of our street, the richest, and the fence blocks the way. You have to go round this area, and it's huge." "So here you are," said Mr. Tom, clearly wary of the fact. "What's the trouble?" "I've never seen him before, and I've never seen any life in this house, no lights, no sounds. So he's not coming for a long time, and will be gone soon, I surmised." "Yes, he's an unpleasant type, in the old man's way," said the guard. "He supposedly comes with his niece, and every time she's new and looks like that. It's disgusting." "No big deal. It's such a time. Everyone has fun as he wants," I answered. "That's true. But he's a very unpleasant man. When he comes for a couple of days a few times a year, I feel uncomfortable. I can't wait for him to go back to his capital with his niece. I hope he'll have a brief visit this time," as always, said Mr. Tom. "That would be nice," I said, trying to cheer the old man up. "Are you going to run again? You're not taking care of yourself, girl. You've already got one skeleton left of you, and you're studying muscles on it. You're punishing yourself." I didn't want to answer that, nor did I want to develop this thought. So I thought I'd just say goodbye kindly. "Yes, Mr. Tom, I'll be off. It'll be dark soon enough." "Go on, girl, take care of yourself." He waved me off. I began to pick up the pace for a regular run. I didn't have my watch with me. I never took anything with me, not even my keys. I just hid them in the cachepot on the porch. Although, to be honest, that was an unnecessary precaution too. It felt like I'd been gone over an hour. I jogged to the other end of the village, turned a little, ran down a wooded alley, and then decided to walk back along the riverbank. Mr. Tom's wariness surprised me and interested me a little. So I decided to run along the bank to Mr. John Stone's house. What if I saw him or his niece along the river? I made it to the big fence without seeing or hearing anything. I can't say I was too upset about it. I decided to take one last run around his property along the fence, run to the end of our street, and come back at a brisk pace. That's how I like to end my run, rounding a huge metal fence with no gaps. I suddenly noticed that the gate was slightly ajar. A huge SUV was parked in the backyard near the garage exit, and something at the bottom of the boot door caught my eye. I slowed my step and then stopped and began to look closely at the boot. At first I thought I was imagining things, but no. The boot was closed, and there was white hair sticking out of it, and I think there was something red on it. Curious and forgetting about caution, I literally walked into the fenced area like a trance and headed for the boot. As I leaned over, I realized it was hair and not something red, but real blood. I didn't have time to collect my thoughts and come up with a plan. Out of the corner of my ear, I heard a sound, but it was too late. Someone came up behind me and stabbed me in the neck. It took me a while to wake up, apparently. I was in some kind of concreted room with no windows and no sunlight. There was a light bulb directly above me. When I woke up, I felt stiff in my movements. Sure enough, I was sitting on a chair and I was bound. My mouth was also taped shut. There was no one else in the room but me. But as I looked around, I saw a burgundy liquid beside me. On the floor, naturally, was the blood of the girl whose hair had drawn me here. It's hard to describe my emotions at that moment. At first, I began to berate myself and scold myself. I'd have to be so stupid to get caught like that. Where did this curiosity come from? Why did I come in? Why didn't I call for help? Why didn't I expect an attack? Anyway, at first I was restrained by the natural urge of self-preservation instinct. After a short break, the self-abuse mode was replaced by a different attitude. The desire I'd been chasing away since February woke up. I began to think with relief that I would finally be reunited with my little daughter, Mia. And that thought gave me a kind of peace that kept me from panicking and hysterical. I don't know how long I indulged in these thoughts, but suddenly the door opened and an attractive middle-aged man walked in. Average height, stocky, short, but well-groomed and handsome. There was no doubt about it, it was Mr. John Stone. So we've met, I grinned to myself. Yeah, you nosy little shit. Are you awake and awake? Said the man in a pleasant baritone. Why did you come in here? Who asked you to? He asked questions as if expecting an answer. Though, considering he'd taped my mouth shut, it would be strange to expect any excuses from me. Maybe it's a good thing I got you, though Mr. John Stone continued. That wench I brought back didn't amuse me much. I was hoping for a longer conversation, and she spoilt it. The bastard threw herself at the knife on purpose. The smile with which he said those vile things made cold sweat trickle down my back. I really hoped I could pass out. As luck would have it, my body had mobilized and I was more alert than ever. Before we begin our communication, we need to clarify a few details. Who are you? And who would know you're here? I realized it wasn't just me I was scared of. It was now clear that Mr. Tom's life was in danger too. As he took a few steps towards me, he jerked the tape sharply. Answer me, you bitch. I don't like repeating myself twice. You'll be very sorry if you make me show you how much I don't like it. I'm Mary. I wanted to take a moment to collect my thoughts, but I didn't know how to do it safely. I don't think you realize the gravity of the situation. I said, who knows you're here? The tone with which he said it clearly made it clear that the maniac did not intend to joke. Moreover, he struck my solar plexus with his fist. If my shoulders had not been tightly pressed against the back of the chair, I would have bent double from the pain that pierced my body. Taking a knife out of his pocket, he smiled, brought it up to my face and said, "See what I have. I'm going to stab you with it next, so think carefully before you answer." I guess for him the answer followed too quickly, since he didn't throw another punch. But for me, my life was flashing before my eyes. Before he walked in, I was ready to accept my fate humbly and go to my little daughter Mia. But the moment Mr. John Stone struck and everything went black before my eyes, I remembered another moment of my life quite inappropriately, how Kyle had walked into my bedroom, and we had talked about how we had no right to live like this. That we should remember and live in remembrance of our family and friends who were no longer with us. That they would not be happy to see us like this. That we should live and fight and try to build our lives anew. At that moment, I felt very ashamed in front of my mummy, my unborn son and my daughter Mia. That I could not let myself give up so easily, give myself to this maniac. I needed a chance, even the tiniest one. My instinct for self-preservation rebelled. My mind seemed completely out of control of what I was saying. I live in the Jackson house. It's my father's, but I live alone. The only person who saw me today was Mr. Tom from next door. I blurted it out and only then realized he wouldn't stop. It's easier for him to take out the hypothetical threat of Mr. Tom to ensure he covers his crimes. Now it made sense to me who the nieces were and why they only came once. Is that the houseboy who thinks he's a security guard? The old man? Mr. John Stone was looming over me with a frightful smile that turned my insides upside down. Yes, I had no choice but to confirm what I had already said. I'll be back soon, baby. Just you wait for me. Really wait for me. He laughed evilly and walked out. Something was drilling into my soul. On the one hand, I was panicking that I had set up a good and kind man who was innocent. On the other hand, having Mr. John Stone around just paralyzed me with fear. I was ready to do anything to make him go away. He was gone indefinitely, so it seemed to me. I hated myself and went through my thoughts as to why I had seen fit to delay my own death at the cost of another man's death while Mr. John Stone was not yet back. I held out hope that I could get out, but as soon as the door slammed shut, I tried to free myself. It was no use. Absolutely pointless. I was duct taped to the chair. Apparently, the previous girl was tied up not so qualitatively, and it spoilt the maniac's holiday. So he tried very hard with me, not making such mistakes. Every arm, every leg was wrapped with several layers of duct tape. My back was tied intentionally too, both around my shoulders and stomach. My thoughts were spinning and spinning, and there was no stopping them. I had never felt like such a creep before. My conscience was working harder than ever. As I went over my options for release, I realized the futility of my attempts. He won't let me go. The fate of all his nieces awaits me. Terror and fear gripped me and ate away at my insides. When Mr. John Stone returned, smiling full mouth, I was exhausted with myself. I didn't have the strength to resist or give in or try to free myself. I decided to take it as it came. I had no way out, and all I was excited about was meeting Mia, my daughter. What I'd have to go through before that seemed like an inevitability. That's it, sweetie, it's just the two of us now, and no one's going to get in our way. He almost sang in his own voice. I noticed blood on the lapel of his tracksuit. It didn't seem to be there when he left. Mr. Tom. The thought that I was responsible for the death of a man, such a good man, suddenly gripped my heart. The pain was unbearable. Apparently, I collapsed from a heart attack. That's all I remember. She didn't say another word, and there was silence. Mr. Matthew Pattison was again wiping away a stingy male tear. He seemed to have cried more this evening and night than he had cried in all his previous life. How had this thin young woman borne it all? Why had she suffered so much evil? This childish and naive thought gave him no rest. His wounded soul demanded justice. If not for himself, then for the other young and innocent. I think it was running that saved me, Mary said suddenly, and the phrase brought Mr. Matthew Pattison out of his trance. Running saved me. Mary continued as if she were talking to herself. The muscles and stamina of my body through exercise have reached a magnitude unprecedented for a woman that Mr. John Stone did not expect. Didn't believe I could survive all those injuries. It's a good thing I don't remember it. I only saw the aftermath when I regained consciousness, thanks to you. And I guess it's no fun playing with a mouse that doesn't react. The equanimity and indifference with which Mary spoke of it shocked the doctor. It was as if she were musing about a football match, something so utterly mediocre and trivial that it was not worthy of the least bit of her attention. Mr. Matthew Pattison's only concern was twofold: why Mary had never decided to contact her husband and father. After all, she could have asked him for the phone a long time ago. And secondly, he wondered if she really blamed herself for Mr. Tom's death. Mr. Matthew Pattison knew him. Tom had gone missing in October, around the same time the doctor had brought a wounded and crippled Mary home. No public attention was drawn to the man's disappearance. He's gone and gone, and that's fine. Now, Mr. Matthew Pattison himself, of course, thought it strange that he had not connected the two facts, though at the time he did not care, as long as he could shelter and protect Mary and help her to get back on her feet. After thinking about it, the doctor made up his mind nevertheless and asked Mary. Asked her both questions, he asked, and Mary was silent. Mr. Matthew Pattison realized that it was impossible, that her psyche wasn't ready yet. Reprimanding himself mentally, he got up from the table and went to the door to give Mary some time to herself. "I'll get that." Her voice caught him off guard. "First to the second question, if you don't mind, as it will partly be the answer to the first." Mr. Matthew Pattison walked on in silence and sat down in his seat. "You see," Mary went on, "I've been thinking about this all the time I've been with you. Is it my fault? Yes and no. I suppose there are people who would have died but would have protected an old man in the same situation, hidden it. And there are people who wouldn't have needed that blow. They told and showed everything at once. But one should blame first of all the person who forces these people, puts them in these circumstances. I have come to this conclusion. It was that guilt that was eating me up. I am the victim who wanted to shoulder the entire load of guilt and drive it on myself, giving up my father just to hurt myself more, to punish myself even more. It's only in the last few days that something clicked in me and I realized that, firstly, by refusing to communicate and not letting my father know where I am, I'm hurting him, not myself. And secondly, I want to do everything I can to make sure that the really guilty one is held accountable for what he has done. Mr. Pattison, it's dawn. I think it's time for us to get out of the house and make some calls. Of course, I want to call my dad first, but then I want to call law enforcement as well. Tell me, can I ask you to not only help me with this, but ask you to continue to be my guardian angel, to come to town with me and live with us as a friend, as a good angel? I see that you are punishing yourself for something too. And I want to thank you by doing something for you. You saved my life. I know you sold that image of Mum's to cure me. I heard you talking to yourself when you thought I was unconscious. I'll never forget that. Mary looked at the old man with tears in her eyes and waited for his answer. He looked at her, crying and smiling. They left the house together and, holding hands, went to the nearest neighbors, from whom they could ask to transfer to Mr. Matthew Pattison Ruhr 100 for the telephone, which he had again forgotten to pay. The man never recognized bank cards, considering them too insistent a manifestation of capitalism. "Hello, Dad, it's me, Mary," she said into the receiver. And tears of happiness flowed down her cheeks again. "Daughter," she heard the man's excited voice in reply. He could not believe his ears, as he was sure that he would never hear or see his daughter again. "I've got the police on my ear," he continued. "We've been looking for you for so long. Where are you? What's wrong with you? Do you need any help?" Mary's family had been worried since the day she stopped contacting them. They immediately contacted the police, but for a long time the search was fruitless. It was only after they found a man in a wooded area who could barely move, sleeping in a small hut and covering a wound that had not yet fully healed with his own piece of trousers, that things started to move. How Mr. Tom had survived was a great mystery, but it was he who had helped to arrest Mr. John Stone, the man who had tortured and destroyed innocent girls for years. "Oh, come on," exclaimed Mary, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Mr. John Stone is in prison?" "Yes, my daughter, yes," replied the father. "Come home." Mary made up with Kyle, who had been at odds with her since her disappearance. Mr. Matthew Pattison was finally back to normal and was even able to return to his medical practice. The case involving Mr. John Stone received huge publicity, and the doctor who saved the woman became a prominent figure. Despite his difficult reputation, Mr. Matthew Pattison received job offers from several hospitals and chose the one he liked. Mary and Kyle took Mr. Tom, and after he was discharged from the hospital, he was still working as a security guard, only now in a safe environment. And a few months after everything happened, Mary and Kyle learned the happy news that she was expecting a baby again. And once again, she couldn't find a place to be with worry and excitement. But it was all in vain. The pregnancy was surprisingly easy, and when the due date came, a long-awaited daughter was born, whom the happy parents named Mia. "It was a gift from fate," said Mary through her tears. "It's your reward," replied Kyle. "Your reward for not giving up, for everything you've been through, and a little bit of mine." Hugging his wife tightly, Kyle looked lovingly at New sleeping in her cot. And for the first time in a long time, he and Mary believed that there was happiness after all. As a child, Linda was considered strange in the yard because she wasn't afraid of dentists either, when other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents with tantrums and faces red from crying. Linda was eager to peek through the narrow slit of the door and see what was going on in there. She wasn't afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked a million questions, flapping her naive childish eyes. The sound of boron machines, the wonders of filling solidification, white coats. All this was an outlandish world for 8-year-old Linda. It was no surprise to anyone that after graduating from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All through high school, she prepared. Diligently, she learned chemical formulas and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Linda put on a white-coat at home, a cap, and imagined that she was seeing patients. She had once borrowed a doctor's outfit from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local polyclinic. "And want you, Linda, in the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts to pick," sighed her mother, stirring the borscht in the pot. "But you want to teach cranky children." "Flipping through a book," replied the daughter. "I guess you're like your grandmother," the woman grinned, "only she was treating cattle on the ranch, and you decided to get to people." Linda grinned understandingly. Grandma Emma had worked as a zoo technician in the small town for a long time, until she retired. And even after that, she often came to check the condition of the animals at the request of her superiors and delivered cows in difficult labor. At the same time, grandmother was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the ranch and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach cows and horses from behind. When the ranch was disbanded, the tough-on-words elderly woman continued to be called by the local owners. So as long as the small town had at least a couple of cows, there was plenty of work. Emma lived like that, where she had worked half her life in a small town in Kansas. Linda's mum, Aunt Melissa, took a different path. She didn't want to live in a small town and went to a bigger city, hoping to fit in and achieve a rank above honorary milkmaid. However, the bigger town did not treat Melissa as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance further than a primary school teacher, but received in the last years of good work, a small one-room flat. The kind where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. It's where Linda was born and raised. No matter how cozy it was under her mother's wing, but at the age of 15 the girl thought about living separately. But no way. The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months, and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Linda was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, after such a prank, her mother did not start any new relationships. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by the holidays. And now Linda stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer wall seemed harsh and pressurizing, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "You're not a sophomore." Someone touched her elbow. Linda turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and strange, age-inappropriate, brightly colored hairpins. She looked like a sophomore. Linda opened her student ID. "Yeah, I'm in 2. "Cool." The stranger shone and clapped Linda on the shoulder. "Finally, I found someone. My name is Catherine, by the way." Linda. "Let's go find our group and office." Without waiting for an answer, Catherine pulled her by the arm towards the entrance. The classmate was probably the kick Linda needed to take the next step towards her goal. None of her high school acquaintances had applied to medical school, and she felt inarticulate. There was a sea of new faces around. Many had traveled from other states to study. Only a couple of times did vaguely familiar necks from high school flicker through the crowd. "I came from the state of Michigan, that's 1,600 kilometers away," whispered Catherine on the pair. "Where are you from?" "I'm a local. I grew up here in the city," Linda replied. She didn't really want to be reprimanded in her first class, but her roommate apparently liked to talk. On the other hand, she needed to make new friends in the student body. "Cool. I'd always wanted to live in the city, but my folks at the ranch wouldn't let me until I graduated." Catherine rolled her eyes. Linda stared blankly at her new acquaintance sunshine skirt, blouse, shoes that had been the trend in town last year, bright shadows and bold lashes. Apparently fashion was delayed in reaching other states. "I want to be a beautician in general, because in our small town, no one knows how to take care of themselves. It's poultices, 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 poultices. It's horrible." Catherine snorted so loudly that she caught the teacher's questioning look. When the danger passed, she expressively poked a finger with acid green varnish on her eyelids and whispered, "And I'll be a makeup artist. I've already seen some success. I've made up all my girlfriends for the wedding." "Yes, I'm sure you did." Linda held back a smile, looking at the bright spots on the face of her interlocutor. The pressure, simplicity, and a certain naivety with which Catherine communicated both repelled and attracted at the same time. In her, there was no frosts of the big city as in her girlfriends. There was wooden, like a birch log, openness, inherent in all people from the backwoods. "What are you going to do? Give injections or run around as a nurse?" Catherine blew her fringes out of her eyes and stared questioningly at Linda. "I plan to specialize as a dentist. It's been a dream of mine since childhood," she replied. "Oh, well, you'll change your mind 10 times. Waved her hand. "What if you don't like it?" "It's difficult. Dentists them now as lawyers, pond. I hope it doesn't happen." Linda tried to write down the outline, while the restless Catherine poured her with questions. "Will you do the session by yourself or with assistants?" Catherine nodded conspiratorially at the teacher. "I'd like to do it myself. I'll teach. I'll try for sure." Linda had already realized that the chatty Catherine wouldn't leave her alone until she had no more questions to ask. Before the end of the class, the girl from the countryside had time to talk about how she had settled in the dormitory, about how her mother had packed her bales with things, about her nagging neighbors nagging that her shoes were uncomfortable, about the cute students from the parallel group. Discussed the hair color and outfits of all the girls sitting nearby. Even the color of the lecturer's shoes did not escape her keen nose. Linda's head was spinning, but the funny thing was that she wanted to keep talking to this strange lady. There was something about her that Linda was missing. When the class was over, Catherine suggested going to a cafe nearby, saying that she wanted to understand the difference between the cakes made in the city and those made in the countryside. Gradually, Linda and Catherine became such friends that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. Calm, restrained Linda and the volcanic Catherine. Studying wasn't easy. Linda was warned about it, and teachers at school, and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate dilettantes, and students from the first year were driven mercilessly. Sometimes Linda fell asleep over the notes. Her head was swollen from the incredible amount of information crammed in. Early rising and the long road to the institute also exhausted her. But the main thing was that the childhood dream, even if slowly, but approached her. Catherine did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines on the pairs, could oversleep, and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. "They'll expel you after the first session." Sometimes said Linda, careless friend. "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician." Catherine waved away. "But for a certificate you need to pass the exam, at least a C," braked her Linda. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the fashionista from the backwoods. In fact, Catherine was not so lazy. She just had a different picture of the world. Instead of daily cramming, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and methods to prop up the wobbly table in her room. Catherine was not lazy, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs. More precisely, they found it themselves, that flyers to hand out in the dormitory. That's something somewhere to carry for a small fee. So by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. Catherine brewed coffee a little better than the cleaner, but made eyes at all visitors and smiled at 32 teeth. She left good tips, which the girl used to buy cosmetics and new handbags. Directness and simplicity from the backwoods of Michigan broke through where the urban was difficult. Catherine was not afraid to look silly, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was just going about it in her own way. Linda and Catherine were always fun. She knew the latest gossip, kept a lot of funny stories, could quickly make up her friend in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Linda stood at the bus stop in the morning and waited for the bus. Several other people were crowding along with her. Time was running out, and the bus was still missing. The grannies behind Linda were getting louder and louder. In the end, a man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase couldn't stand it any longer and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had gone. "They've all been abolished. He shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Now you go to the center only with transfers. Rumors that the bus would be abolished had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a taxi. Linda realized that she would have to do the same to avoid being late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Linda gave away all her money, even scraped change out of the furthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Catherine. "Where have you been? I was already thinking about how to get you off." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Linda complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get here now. It's either a detour across the city or a taxi." "So you moved to my dorm," Catherine shouted at once. 5 minutes and you're at school. The main thing is not to forget to brush your teeth." Linda wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea wasn't so bad. And if she had to choose between getting up an hour earlier and expensive taxes, Catherine and the dormitory won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Student room fees were ridiculous. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mum's for the weekends. "I just had a neighbor who moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked." Catherine theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly." Linda nodded. The time that was spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking, and getting enough sleep. The superintendent was a little nagging when she gave her the papers. "What are you doing?" "You're a local. I need to settle non-residents." The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog wanting to put a dog on a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. Eventually she accepted the application and told her the move-in date. As soon as they were out of the dormitory, Catherine squeezed Linda so tightly in her arms that she even squeaked. "Yay, yay, we're together now." Her mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The flat was cozy, but cramped, and that fact, alas, even a mother's love didn't change. "Don't eat anything bad there," Melissa admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag. "And don't drink, at my place." She shook her fist expressively, but rather jokingly. "Or that Catherine, your girl, will start to influence you badly," continued the woman. "She's fine." Linda defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on a day off, the girl arrived at the dormitory with her things. Catherine was already waiting for her, helped her to bring everything in, to settle in, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Linda had her own separate bed, her own desk, a wardrobe shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple of minutes from the uni, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Linda and Catherine were walking down the corridor and suddenly they were called. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Johnson." Catherine turned and tilted her head to the side, like a magpie looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Let's join us, because we, the female company, is not enough." The guy waved his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, we'll drink you, we won't leave you offended. It's our birthday, after all." Linda tugged Catherine's elbow questioningly. "That's Henry Johnson from 3rd year. He's been after me since the beginning of term," she whispered back. "He's not bad, but he's a bit of an oaf." "And you want to go?" Linda took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come. "Why not?" Catherine stared at her, puzzled. "Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit, chat, all of us. Nothing to be afraid of." She turned to Johnson. "All right, we'll be there soon, just wait." The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up, and disappeared into the room. Linda hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Catherine in 6 months of school. Of course, she'd talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same, and her old school friends came to visit less and less often, and wrote shorter and shorter letters. And they didn't understand why they had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Catherine quickly combed her hair, changed from pajama trousers into jeans, found a decent t-shirt in the wardrobe. Linda didn't bother with that. She just tied her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin as a pole, but very hospitable. An old acquaintance beckoned and greeted the girls and introduced the company. This is David, the birthday boy, and his Lady Mary. This is Alex, the future of urban medicine. And this Henry jabbed his finger at a boy sitting on a chair by the window, is Ray from the journalism department. The girls were warmly welcomed and seated at the communal table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, joking. Mary suggested a game of crocodile. The boys readily moved the bed and, making room, Linda stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Henry was making small talk with Catherine. It was obvious he liked her. He was trying to put his arm around her, brushing invisible dust from her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. David and Mary had been together for a long time. It was obvious from their communication and warmth towards each other. A note of distant envy even ran through Linda's mind. She had dated a guy in high school, but he had never treated her with the care and warmth that these two did for each other. Alex made occasional jokes about doctors. During breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food, he'd already put a couple of ketchup stains on his t-shirt. But would that stop a man with a big appetite? Ray was the only one Henry introduced differently than the others, and he didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands. But that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, he joked, he asked provocative questions, he posed picturesquely. Ray's a talker, David snorted. He's a man who's chosen his profession to scratch his tongue. I'd rather scratch my tongue than pick at people. The journalism student made a theatrical grin, which immediately caused the company to laugh. What's wrong with helping people? Linda suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Ray also looked at the guest. Well, you're not going to help them for free. Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society? He sarcastically teased Linda. I want to help first of all. I go into the profession by the call of my heart, not because it is profitable, said the girl. You need to eat, don't you? So stop covering your ambition with charity. Ray waved his hand at her. Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will make money by talking, and some will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body. Ray, come on, this is the 3rd year you've been arguing with us. All professions are needed and all have their talents. David said conciliatingly, let's have a drink and play cards. Linda gave Ray an irritated look, but didn't argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Ray had the typical smarmy looks, chiseled features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation blurred and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed midnight when there was a knock on the door. Sugar, David hissed, the commandant's here. Before Linda knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Mary and Alex were tucked under one bed, Catherine and Henry under another, and she and Ray were shoved into the wardrobe. It all happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding David in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, while he did his best to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was, every time. Ray sighed in Linda's ear, why don't you just pay your aunt a wage? He'll hide us in the cupboards, you idiot. The wardrobe was cramped. Linda felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lashing out. Ray gently touched her shoulder, as much as he could do while standing in a wardrobe full of clothes. You'll have to excuse me, okay? It's my nature to pick things apart. That was rude. Without turning round, Linda replied. She could feel the guy's guilty, if guilty, breath on the back of her neck. It was getting stuffy. Let's go out tomorrow, and as an apology, you pick where you want to go. Ray put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last of her nagging remarks, wagged her finger at David, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down his body, hot and cold at the same time. The tension was back in the air, but lingering, enveloping. "Let's go," Linda agreed, to the exhibition of contemporary artists at the gallery. "All right, I'll be waiting at 17 at the dormitory." The wardrobe doors swung open. "Why aren't you two fighting?" David chuckled. "Almost." Ray was the first to jump out, winking discreetly at Linda. "You all right? Why did they put you and that jerk in there?" Catherine clucked, giving the boy a stare. "I think we're going on a date with that jerk," Linda whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. "Linda, you have golden hands." The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Linda took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 in medical school, then residency for another 3. Paperwork for the registrar's office. A dressing gown to take home to wash. So what else Catherine to call? They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Linda threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk, and hurried to the shop for a cake. Catherine had still had a sweet tooth since uni. No one was home to see her yet. Ray warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. He'd started moonlighting there while he was still at school, and 7 years later he'd taken the editor's chair himself. But Ray had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They were married in college, a year after the relationship and that dorm room meeting. Catherine had convinced her that Ray was good, of course, but he was dapper and pays her. Her mother didn't take the journalism profession seriously. What kind of work is it to gather gossip? Like plowing in a factory or sowing grain, that's a job. She snorted when Linda came to visit at weekends and raved about her boyfriend. Ray was not what he seemed at first glance, nor was he what everyone else saw him as. He could be caring and sensitive, and even restrained his desire to pick at everything. At the same time, remained the soul of the company, a noisy lighter. Many girls openly envied Linda and openly glared at Ray when they appeared at the institute. "There's nothing to see here," Catherine waved her hands at them. "You're not here for the ballet." Shoo. Although she had initially opposed Linda and Ray's relationship, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, she told the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Catherine simply had nothing to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? The backwoods fashionista had affairs with 2 or 3 at a time. Never a dull moment in the evening. Sometimes she chose from several candidates and was not ashamed to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve suitors. So Catherine finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She did not go to any residency and settled in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup, hair, and other beauty procedures. From boredom, or from flightiness, married, and 6 months later divorced. Another year fluttered on dates and married again. Catherine wasn't lazy, she was just lucky. She was also never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others failed. Linda sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Catherine's road, on the other hand, wiggled like a snake and pitted or went under the clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Linda was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a fuss in the entrance and a call. "Can you believe it, you bastard?" The client was late. She held me up. Then the taxi was still running. Catherine started to get indignant. Linda only smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been any other way. In the past few years, Catherine had changed from a strange backwoods girl with ambitions into a genteel city beauty. She had a bob haircut, was always wearing makeup and fashionably dressed. And she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you cooked for Ray." Catherine, barely passing into the kitchen, immediately stuck her nose in the pots on the cooker and in the fridge, and she has borscht and stuffed cabbage and compote. Linda did not chase after brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply. But she knew how to keep things cozy and on time. "Harry's nagging at me because I don't cook," Catherine complained. "Everyone has their talents," Linda reassured her as she poured tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Linda was making coffee for the third time when Ray finally came home. The young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen to say a quick hello, hugged his wife and retired to his room, saying he'd had a hard day. "Why is he so sour?" Catherine asked, after a glance at the man. "He must be tired." Linda shrugged her shoulders. "I can't force him to sit down at the table." Come on. Catherine jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What is this?" She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the stunned Linda. She stopped in surprise. Maybe it was an accident? "Yeah. Say it was blown in by the wind. I'm a friend of men. I know them like the back of my hand. He came in tired, with someone else's hair on, and he's working hard, poor man." "What are you implying?" Linda looked round the room. "I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers." Catherine shrugged her shoulders. "We need to watch him. Think back. Maybe you had something strange going on." Linda thought about it. Her friend's suspicions had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the building shake. Ray had replaced in Linda the father she had been deprived of. He became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if a whole universe was formed in the merger of 2 dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises in their relationship. There were quarrels, as with everyone, but they quickly became the past. For the last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they started to socialize less. "Is everything okay in bed?" Catherine questioned her. "Well, maybe because of the work became a little less." "Yes," agreed Linda. "Yes, what are you bothering at all? There is one hair, and already panic." "Her hair is where it all starts." Catherine raised her finger authoritatively. "I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts and his laptop too." "I'm not going to sniff his shirts. What's the big deal?" Linda was indignant, although subconsciously doubts were already clinging to her. "And also go to his workplace. Maybe they have a red-headed student trainee there," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. Catherine said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while and Catherine went home. "Yes, Lindochka, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Ray. You're my regular at the Willow and Bath Cafe next week, Friday." "We'll come." Of course, Linda nodded. "Smell the shirts." Catherine winked at her, sent her a kiss and disappeared into the lift. Involuntarily, but Linda began to look at her husband. Until Catherine's words, she had never thought to accuse him of cheating. Of course, this fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Linda went through her husband's things. "God, what am I doing?" she asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Ray's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Linda calmed down and put Catherine's words out of her mind. Catherine is Catherine and her Ray is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with loads of people in a day. Whoever her husband might have had a meeting with. It's all nonsense. "Ray, we're all right, aren't we?" Linda asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she asked. The inner restlessness hadn't completely gone away. Ray turned to her. "Yes, why are you suddenly asking?" "Why am I asking?" Linda wondered. "You can't tell me Catherine found the hair." "You've been away at work lately. We don't talk much," she said. "Lindochka, you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll get an assistant and relax a little." Ray smiled at her. "Oh, here we are." Catherine was already waiting for them at the entrance. Apparently drunk and in full battle color, she was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her. so she could invite anyone to the party. Linda sometimes wondered where the careless Catherine got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men: the owner's husband, the masseur's boyfriend, and Linda's and Catherine's husbands. Linda didn't know her friend's new husband. She had only seen him at the wedding and couldn't remember where he had come from. Harry looked frankly bored, constantly attached to glasses of champagne, sighed, and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Linda successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. The only person outside was Catherine, who was on the phone. "Have you seen Ray?" her friend asked her. Catherine put the machine away in her purse. "Linda, while you participated in the raffle, your husband doused his trousers with wine and went to change," she shouted. "And we, came delivery of new manicure tables. Idiots, they mixed up the days. I'm going to go to the salon to get them so Miranda doesn't freak out." "Ciao, Linda. I'll be right back. Have fun." Catherine jumped into a taxi and sped away. Puzzled, Linda dialed Ray, who confirmed that he had doused his trousers, would change and be back soon. "Miss me?" She heard a voice from behind her. Harry emerged from the doorway. Linda answered it automatically. "No." They said hello very crumply for the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and left so hastily. "Let's talk, shall we? I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these chickens from the salon. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors." He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. "Come on," Linda agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. Harry asked about his work, his habits, his studies, but only when he was talking about himself. He complained about Catherine, either explicitly or implicitly. Linda realized he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone in such a way about her friend, as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. "She cooks once a week, and then some rubbish that's impossible to eat, and I'm used to home-cooked food. My mom was a cook all her life." Harry sighed. "You work here from morning till night. You want borscht, tea, cutlets, pies, and she'll buy salads or dumplings, dear. Ugh. But she puts on makeup for 3 hours." "Why did you get married then?" Cautiously switching to you, asked Linda. "She's beautiful. She's so beautiful. You can't take your eyes off her. When I saw her, the veil covered my brain. But now you realize that you can't eat beauty alone." Harry finished smoking, moved closer and whispered. "And I gave her money for a share in that damned salon for some reason. I thought she'd stop hanging around there herself. She'd be home to manage and earn an income. No way." Linda suddenly felt sorry for Harry. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married, and on the other hand, beauty had always fooled men. "I'd like a wife like you, Linda, a calm, responsible, homely woman who's ready to raise children. Not plaster chickens in front of the mirror," Harry said, looking into her eyes. Linda was taken aback and pulled her fingers out of Harry's hands, which he had already managed to grab. "I don't think that's a good idea," the girl cut him off. "We should have gone back inside a long time ago." She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically, her head was full of bewilderment and shame, her ears were ticking. Linda sat down in her seat at the table and poured half a glass of wine. "Shall I tell Catherine what happened, the complaints, Harry and the fat hints? She'll start questioning him. They'll have a fight, have to stir it all up again." "No, let them deal with their own problems and each other." Linda took a swig of her drink and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach, and she wanted to hug Ray, but he had disappeared. She phoned. Her husband said he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic, and finally he walked into the cafe in jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, a panting Catherine burst in, desperately arguing on the phone with someone. "What kind of idiots are these? This is not a company, this is a quiet horror. Not only did they come on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. "I'm sorry it took so long." Linda Ray hugged her from behind. "The traffic would drive you crazy." "Why didn't you warn me?" Linda asked the girl. "I was standing in the middle of the hall with, pardon me, wet trousers. I don't have time to talk." I hurried to the car and rushed to change my trousers. Ray waved his arms guiltily to the sides. Nearby, Catherine continued to make noise and indignation. Linda calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand on her arm. On the other side of the table sat a silent Harry, glaring at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Linda was finishing up her work at the clinic. She was in a good mood. Her last 8-year-old patient had been a delight to her with his bravery and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye. And under his mom's proud, embarrassed gaze, he said, "Thank you." Of course, Linda could not just let the little hero leave the office and handed him a brand new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. "Linda, help me out." Catherine's voice came through the phone. "Come as a model. My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick, the bastard." "Now?" Linda was surprised. "Yes. It's urgent." Catherine begged. "Okay, I'll be right there." The girl hung up the phone. Linda often helped her friend. It was not difficult and pleasant. After all, she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Catherine's training was not disrupted. It took Linda about half an hour to get to the salon. She was already waiting, sat in a chair, and under the popular tracks of the radio airwaves, Catherine and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another round of thanks and scolded the irresponsible model student who didn't show up. When the work was done and the student went home, Catherine suggested that Linda stay and have a cup of coffee. It turned out very well. Catherine looked at the makeup and said, "She's a smart girl. Maybe something good will come out of her." Linda clapped her eyelashes theatrically, turning one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Linda wouldn't have confused them. She'd been to Catherine's workplace so many times she'd already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. "I thought you said you were going to replace the tables." She stared questioningly at her makeup artist friend. "Where are they?" "They turned out to be defective. We sent them back." Catherine waved her hand. "What, all at once?" Linda wondered. "They all had scratched tops. I told you, idiots. Those movers were pounding them against each other like crazy." Catherine brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. "Only spoilt our holiday in nerves." "Did they hit you with the tables too?" Linda nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. "Yeah." Catherine didn't even look at her arm. "They opened the door as if it were their home. And I got bumped for company." The friends were finishing their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic, when Catherine, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly jumped in. Linda looked. She shoved a machine with a picture open on the screen to Linda's nose. The girl looked at the picture and hesitated. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Ray worked. The guys were with some certificates in their hands, apparently another award from the big shots. But another interesting thing was that a young red-haired girl was standing next to Ray. "Aha," Catherine shouted triumphantly. "I told you so, I told you so." "I told you so," Linda said, looking at the photograph. I felt sick to my stomach. The nasty feeling from her conversation with Harry and the homespun excitement of finding the red hair again. "It's okay, Linda, we'll expose him." Catherine clenched her manicured fingers into a fist. "If anything, you'll be the first to file for divorce." "What divorce, Catherine?" Linda jumped up like a flaming rock. "It's not even clear yet." "It's as clear as day, dear." Your friend folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. "Your ray's gone off and we've got to go over there and pull that redhead's hair out." "Right." Linda clenched her hands on her temples. "I don't believe in this nonsense." "Okay," Catherine agreed. Watch him very carefully this week. Men always get caught up in the little things. Linda nodded. She was tempted to give Catherine a hint about Harry's behavior, but she didn't. Resentment could make a mess of things, especially since Catherine was just drawing her own conclusions. A little obsessively, but for now there was no one to take offense at and nothing to take offense at. Ray was on his usual behavior. Linda, teased by Catherine's confidence, began to surreptitiously watch her husband, something she usually never did. Linda, until that day, had thought that there was no point in restricting the freedom of a partner, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Ray very much, admired him as a man, as a human being. The more control, the higher the probability of the opposite effect, and to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband, a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to that was enough at work. At home wanted to be calm. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor is a chameleon to adjust to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening, at home wanted to be himself. Feeling like a delinquent schoolgirl, Linda rummaged through her husband's rucksack, his notebook, while he was in the shower. She found a list of phone numbers and women's names on the pages of the notebook and a strange pink-colored pen in his jacket pocket. Her heart pounded, thudding in her ears, as if it had been covered with a bucket. "Linda, what are you doing?" Ray stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence she had found in her hands. "Are you accusing me of something?" The man folded his arms across his chest. "What is it?" Linda jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. "These are the candidates for the assistant position." The man shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "I interviewed them last week. I put them all here. Why?" "Did you use this?" Linda waved a pink girl's pen in the air. "First my own. Then I ran out of paste and Kira lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff?" Ray looked round at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Linda felt like a fool. She mumbled something under her breath, slipped the notebook and pen to her husband, and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way into her thoughts. Linda squeezed her temples with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Catherine about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and suggested that she follow up with him to be sure. Linda looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back. "Come on." Linda went to bed late. Ray was already having his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Ray to work, and waited for Catherine. Her friend arrived just as Ray drove out of the yard. "You ready?" Catherine's voice had a poorly concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. "Do I have a choice?" Larissa looked at her as she buckled her seatbelt in the car. "Well, you might not like what you see if you see anything." Catherine corrected herself, shrugging her shoulders. "But I'd rather not see anything, of course." "He's a little distant," Linda murmured as they caught up with Ray on the road and pulled a few cars ahead of them. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. "That's how it starts," Catherine nodded, looking down the road. "First they get cold feet and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled." "Did your previous husband cheat on you?" Linda suddenly blurted out for some reason. Katya jerked slightly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. "Bill might have cheated," she said uncertainly, "but I didn't care anymore. I went out on a date, and I realized I was sick of Bill. Yeah, I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when he got bored, I filed for divorce." "Aren't you afraid that Harry might cheat on you?" Linda barely restrained her impulse to spill the truth. "Harry? Please." Catherine waved her hand, instantly relaxing. "He's in love with me like a dog, always waiting for me." "He's not that in love." Linda muttered under her breath so Catherine wouldn't hear. They pulled into the car park outside Ray's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush. Catherine promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and scones. It took until lunchtime to doze in the car. Catherine nudged Linda in the shoulder as Ray came out of the agency with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got in the car and got ready to drive out. "Let's go lovebirds, we'll get them now," Catherine muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Linda watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl in the photo. Ray had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion drove down to the city utility into the stationery shop. On the whole, there were no provocative moments, except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder of papers, occasionally asking Ray something or answering the phone. He hardly ever took his eyes off the phone, even when he was driving. "Yeah, he's holding the door for you." Catherine's eyes widened when she noticed her friend's husband's gesture of kindness. "Almost always," Linda replied, following Ray with her eyes. "Look, why don't you call him right now?" Catherine suggested. "Ask him what he's doing and see what the answer is." Linda dialed the number and waited. Ray's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. "Hi, did you pick up lunch?" she blurted out at his hello. "No, I'll eat in the canteen." "Don't worry," her husband replied in a completely calm voice. "All right," Linda stretched out. "How was your day?" "I'm traveling for work." "And why are you calling?" "No reason." Linda sensed that her husband suspected something. "I'll see you tonight, bye." Catherine listened to this conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She waggled her eyebrows expressively, hiding. That's right. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Linda's chest. Why the hell does he even need an assistant? Catherine clasped her hands together. Somehow he's been working on his own for 2 years, and nothing. And now all of a sudden, the ambition of the head of the brain. "I don't know." Linda was staring out the window. "Tired, I guess." "Yeah, from work or your wife." Catherine snorted. "Let's go home. Are you drinking white or red?" In the evening, Ray found the 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Linda couldn't get Catherine out of the house for about an hour. She was asking for a drink. She was hugging. She was hugging. She was losing something in her bag. Eventually, Harry arrived and took his rambunctious wife himself. He cast a glance at Linda, full of interest and question, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Linda the best and most innocent of men. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with just her lips. Ray sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her, only set the alarm clock, put a couple of loose pills on the table, and put a glass of water. Then he went out, standing on the threshold of the room as if in doubt, but the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Linda, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Linda became nervous and twitchy. She began to be late for work. For the first time, she snapped at a patient who traveled to her from across town. "Linda, maybe you should take a holiday?" sympathetically asked the admin girls at the front desk. "Maybe I will," replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Ray's relationship. He hugged her dryly, he forgot the usual little things, or he dropped her calls and called her back. Linda remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Ray always stood out. He was stately, charismatic, had a great sense of humor, and a sharp mind. Next to him, she, no, but felt sometimes that she was falling short. Over the years, Ray had not lost any of his appeal, and even became even brighter. "You've got a payday today. Go to the shopping center, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, and your mood will improve," advised Linda. It was a good idea. In this turmoil, she had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer, and she didn't have to be cramped with stupid jeans and notorious t-shirts. Linda called Catherine and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. In the shopping center, the windows were full of sale posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Linda remembered what trousers and styles of dresses Catherine had advised her the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a nice surprise she heard behind her when she came out to assess her outfit in the large mirror in front of the booths. Linda turned around and saw Harry. The man had wandered into the mall, apparently for the same reason she had to update his wardrobe. Well, what a surprise. Linda grumbled, "Hello, Harry. The dress fits perfectly." He gave her a thumbs up, "Don't even think about it." This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down my back. "Linda, I wanted to apologize," Harry began, putting his hands behind his head shyly. "I got drunk in that cafe out of nervousness and fatigue, talking rubbish. I'm sorry, I acted like a complete prick." Linda was surprised, pleasantly surprised. "Okay, it happens. What are you doing here?" She glanced around the shop, as if confirming the question. "I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, exhaled, and decided to buy something I'd been wanting for a while." Harry nodded at the bag from the hardware shop, and the new jeans are a bonus. Linda looked at the jeans appraisingly. "You take them too, don't think twice." She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in the form of Harry was somehow to her liking. Maybe it was a distraction from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. "Catherine's all worked up, and she won't come with me," he said as they left the shop. "Me too, she's busy today," Linda confirmed. "How about a coffee?" Harry suggested, "or was there something else you wanted to buy?" Larissa thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed and nodded in agreement, approving the idea of coffee at the checkout. At the cafeteria checkout, she dashed over to pay herself, but Harry was the first to arrive and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her, the latter of which Linda hadn't ordered. "Oh, come on. As the husband of my best friend." Harry waved his hand. "We're practically related." He didn't get a chance to say anything before he heard a text message from the bank. "What was that for?" Harry stared sourly at Linda, looking at the balance on the card. "Almost, but not relatives." The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, choosing one pretty thing or another. Linda sensed that Harry was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed at the same time. He talked about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of schooling. There was even room for a story about his childhood and Harry's fun holidays as a first grader in a small town. Listening to all of this, Linda did the most important thing. She took her mind off the intrusive thoughts of her husband's outings. She had to get home. It was nearing evening and Linda hailed a taxi as they stood at the entrance to the shopping center. "Thanks for the company at the mall," Linda smiled as the car pulled up. "Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime?" Harry opened the taxi door for her. "It's probably not the right thing to do," Linda hesitated. Harry gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, "Well, you're a big girl. It's time you prioritized what's right." Linda drove home dazed, outraged, and flattered, a rattling mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment towards her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from Harry. It wasn't right. It wasn't nice that she was having coffee with her best friend's husband who was making ambiguous hints to her for the second time. Why? Well, of course she knew why. She knew that she loved Ray. She knew that she valued Catherine as a friend and loved one. And she knew that she wasn't ready to go for what Harry was veiledly offering her. All plain and simple. But then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Ray? How long has it been since he spent almost half of his day off with her? The more Linda thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilds or to an unpleasant crossroads. "Tomorrow I'll talk to Ray straight," Linda decided, "and I'll tell Catherine the truth about her husband. That'll be the right way to prioritize." The next day, Linda had few patience, so she got off early after work. On the way, she received a call from a nervous Ray, asking her to bring the work phone she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Catherine's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily sang into the phone about her agreement and even asked if she should dress up. "No, we'll just sit around," came the reply. As Linda entered the flat, she heard Ray's work phone ringing. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced absently at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls. "Will computers? Information bridge," Linda mumbled, flicking through the screen on her smartphone. She was already getting into a taxi when a text message sent around 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "I missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow." Linda felt as if she had been splashed with cold water. There it was. Her suspicions, here in her hands on the screen of her husband's phone. Tears welled up in her eyes, her nose stung, and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Linda caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was taken aback. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman who wanted revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. "Boss," Linda hissed, clutching the phone so tightly that it almost cracked. The taxi driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He could sense with his spinal cord that something was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number the text message had been sent from. Linda burst into the agency's office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Ray's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. "Ray," at lunch, said a fellow journalism student timidly, emerging from the right. He was the first one to catch Linda's furious gaze. "We'll wait for him here." Linda glanced angrily at the assistant's empty chair next to the office and plumped down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the desktop. The whole office stared at her with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Ray on the sly, and he came rushing in a few minutes later. "How's it good, sweetheart?" Linda got up from her chair and angrily shoved the phone screen with the message into his nose. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kira, who was frozen in the doorway behind the boss with a stack of documents. "Linda, what's the gig?" Ray tried to pull his wife into the office. "Come on, let's talk calmly." Linda pulled out of her husband's arms and expressively raised her hand with the phone, showing it to the whole office. "Know why? I want everyone to know what a wonderful person you are." She emphasized the word wonderful, a decent boss and a faithful husband. Ray clutched his head, feeling Spanish shame for his wife. "And you should be," Linda pointed her finger at a stunned Kira, "ashamed of yourself for messing around with a married man." "Linda, stop it." Ray grabbed his wife in an arm and dragged her forcefully into his office. Let me go, you traitor." Linda lashed out, hitting her hand on the door. Annoyed, Ray sat his wife in his chair and loomed over her. "What did you do? And even if it's such an emergency, why the show? What are you trying to accomplish?" Linda looked at him with eyes red with rage and tears. She shoved the work phone and the message on it in her husband's face again. "How do you explain this? Sleeping with your young assistant, huh? That's it. The old wife is no longer honored." "Linda, have you lost your mind?" Ray rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Somebody obviously got the wrong number in the heat of the moment. I even know Linda crossed her arms over her chest, that red head with the hair you come home with. "Jesus, don't you have anything better to do than look for other people's hair on my shirts?" Ray rolled his eyes. "Find something more productive to do. And Kira has a fiancé, just so you know. And you call your Kira's number, and we'll find out if she's wrong or not," Linda demanded with clenched fists. Everything inside her was boiling with rage and responded with a new wave to every phrase of her husband. Her back was soaked, her cheeks and forehead were burning. Ray picked up his work smartphone and pressed the speakerphone during a call. The answering machine's electronic voice came through the receiver. It rang several times, but to no avail. "That doesn't prove anything," Linda said. "Linda, go home. Please stop embarrassing me in front of my subordinates," Ray asked in a very firm, quiet voice, turning away to the window. The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that it was as if everyone was laughing at her in her voice without being embarrassed about it. Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw back at Ray, grabbing the doorknob. "I have no idea." "As if there weren't enough bosses in town," Ray replied without turning around. Linda stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen curious eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the corridor, not looking at anyone, and on the way out of the building she saw Kira standing by the car park. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Linda froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back for so long tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. It's okay. Linda. Catherine counted drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy, cunning, but do not cry because of it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Linda a glass of water and a sedative. Catherine arrived as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. "Catherine, I've embarrassed him." She took the glass with a shaky hand, and him and me. "I'm anticipating a story on their website editor's sleep-deprived ex-wife breaks into office. Oh my God, that's embarrassing." Linda was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. "Well," Catherine said, "at least you're remembered. Why do you have to go there anyway?" "I'm such an idiot." Linda leaned into her friend's shoulder. "We're all a little bit stupid." Catherine gently put her palm on her head. "Why did you call me this afternoon?" Linda realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. "I just wanted to chat," she said. "Maybe go shopping." "Well, we're not going out now. No foundation can hide your puffy eyes. I'm telling you as an expert." Catherine raised her finger to the ceiling, which made Linda smile a little. "What are you going to do about Ray?" "I don't believe in random messages." "I don't know, maybe I'm just really paranoid." Linda leaned back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling. "If so, I should apologize." "I'd still dig." Catherine did not stop. "It would be reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure." "I'll talk to him," Linda breathed out, "if I could." For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's phone again, and once again it was answered by the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Ray came home late that evening, but Linda still waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and, without a word, left for the shower. "Ray, I'm sorry." Linda waited for him in the room. The man walked past her, shaking his head. "I'll forgive you, Linda, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There'll be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kira the day off." "I was wrong, Ray." Linda stared sorrowfully at the floor. "I'm so ashamed." "I was so ashamed." Ray sat down on the other side of the couch. "You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, doing this and that, because of some stupid mistake by some stranger, whoever the hell she is." "It just seemed to me that our relationship had grown cold," Linda murmured quietly. "When it seems, darling, it's customary to cross yourself," Ray muttered. "You're playing the jealous wife, aren't you?" The idea had failed. "But Catherine," said Linda began. "Oh, you and Catherine should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that." Her husband came at her again. "She doesn't know what she's listening to. She can't see what's under her nose, but she's giving you the best advice. She herself has a husband who walks left and right." All of a sudden, Ray stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he'd said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Linda's ears perked up. Anyway, the man squeezed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and closed his eyes. "Take a sedative and don't talk to Catherine about any of this nonsense. She's a bad influence." Ray got up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Linda was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubt. Ray knows something about Harry but keeps quiet, male solidarity or something. And why is he suddenly so against Catherine? The tormented Linda paid no attention to her husband's real coldness and his blatant unwillingness to address the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Linda that she and 2 other young dentists were going to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It might help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found any reason to do so in Linda's life. Her husband was friendly to her. Catherine still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients hadn't decreased. But behind the outer mask of normality was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Linda could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her spouse. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No, enough with the suspicions. I'd better get my own family in order first. Ray agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. Go listen to some smart guys and aunts, go for a walk, and get all the nonsense out of your head, he told Linda as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely traveled by train, and each time it was a bit of a novelty. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby to the clinking of the glass of the cup holders. Maybe Ray's right, I am paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there's never been any occasion, Linda thought, looking out the window at the passing railway stations and Christmas trees. And the amount of stares at him at uni, I didn't care then, well, hardly. Yes, it's all Catherine's way of panicking herself and others. Whether it was the monotonous choo-choo-choo that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the journey, Linda was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll be back and we'll definitely go to Grandma's in Iowa, Linda decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Linda thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Ray about the trip, how the 2 of them would go to the place where the malachite was mined. It's a shame Catherine isn't with me, the girl thought as she watched the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Linda really wanted to share her peacefulness with her loved ones. After all, her colleagues were only colleagues. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker couldn't come due to illness, apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Linda decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. Here's a surprise for Ray, I'll be home early. And with a tan too, she smiled as she looked out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the journey, Linda had a nice chat with her neighbor and her grandson of 9 years. Granny treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about work, recalling her own youth. The morning city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It was not as warm as the sea, and even a little fresh. Outside the window of the taxi passed sleepy alleys and early joggers. In the alleys, the first rays of sunshine dispersed the foggy remnants, played in the puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The taxi driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Linda thought about how she would go up to the flat, go in quietly and get into bed with Ray asleep. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Linda quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Ray. Quietly, she walked into the flat, and as soon as she saw the familiar corridor, she was dumbfounded. All the good cheer she'd brought with her from the sea had gone down and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart pounded like the wheels of the train that had brought her back here. There were shoes lying in the corridor that she would have recognized out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and had picked up the last pair in town. The shoes were Catherine's. By the mirror, however, Linda saw her keys and the same painfully familiar car fob. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something's happened and Catherine's come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Linda heard soft voices, It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into buying me the salon outright from Miranda. A familiar female voice sounded. "Will you get a divorce as soon as the deal is official?" The husband's voice answered him. "The same day." "When are you going to file the papers?" I'm thinking of what to tell her followed a sigh. The idea of a fake affair has failed. It failed because someone left their work phone at home, the woman's voice interrupted. "I've been working her as hard as I can." A little bit more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have come out dry. And now you either have to talk to her head on or think of something else. In the forehead is a pity. I don't like her as a woman, but as a human being, I pity her. "And it is not a pity to make a show," smirked a female voice. "I choose the lesser of two evils," said the male voice. Linda clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold swept down her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands. Her realization fell in pieces, and each was nastier than the last. It burned, drained away all the good inside, like acid. "Ray, you and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid." "But if it had worked, then," Catherine's voice sounded quietly, but ingratiatingly, "might not have been these long years with a bore from the dentist. My husband might not have been there, and now everything would be easier, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, it will Ray confirmed. We'll run the salon remotely. You run the salon and I'll run the agency." Linda felt the tears wet her t-shirt and imprinted hot drops on her chest. "We'll be gone, and they might have something with Harry. I've seen the way he looks at her," he chuckled from behind the door. "I've seen the way he looks at her. She's the perfect girl for Linda. She loves dumplings, borscht, and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short for you. She loves her job and doesn't like herself very much," said Ray. "We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the homegirl who always has everything planned. I feel like an old man around her. I want something different." "I know what you want, Ray." "What do you want, Ray?" Catherine cooed. From across the room there was a commotion. Linda sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought were closest to her, after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out. The cup was empty. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the flat in what she was wearing. The street, the morning, Linda ran away from the shame and disgrace she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Catherine's fingers, to send the smug, insolent man to the dormitory. Every year that passed was like a rod whipping her in the back, leaving deep wounds and triple the pain that came on more and more. Tears welled up in her eyes. Everything was cloudy and barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. She was shouted at by passers-by, but Linda didn't hear, didn't see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling, from herself. "Girl, look out," was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The measured sounds of the PI snapped Linda out of oblivion. She also thought irritably, what was that nasty beeping sound like the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the past? Her eyes struggled to open, her body felt woozy, her right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My entire right side responded with painful tightening when I tried to turn around on the bed, and my head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake, Linda," greeted her by a woman in a white dressing gown. Linda looked around and only then realized she was in a hospital bed. "What happened to me?" She looked at the leg in a cast sticking out from under the blanket. "You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, mild concussion, and moderate bruises," the doctor replied. Looking through the documents, they pick up other people in pieces in such cases. "You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you'll be well soon." "Not all the family." Linda turned her back to the wall. "Is there someone coming to call your relatives?" the doctor asked. "Tell my husband I was hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her," Everlinda said, without turning round. The doctor shook her head. "If they come, don't let them in my room," Linda added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the Red Cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't seem to bother them much in the face of how much their souls were torn. Her mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Linda told her everything she had heard that morning. When Melissa left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered her not to let anyone with names beginning with the letters R and K see her daughter. Linda blocked the numbers of her husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a colleague friend to collect her belongings from her husband's flat when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks and the fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Linda thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," the girl shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mom had brought. "Hello, Linda," came a familiar voice. Harry stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a dressing gown thrown over his shoulders. Linda had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. "You don't know how hard it took me to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "It's almost like they're checking IDs to get to you." "That's my request," Linda nodded. "Why? Are you hiding from someone?" Harry joked. "Maybe I am," the girl confirmed. Harry stared at her in surprise, his eyes wide with question and incomprehension. Linda exhaled and decided to tell him. She recalled everything, including Catherine's outings at the Institute, her consumerist attitude to men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of her friend. Harry listened with his mouth open. "I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy the salon. Catherine is using you and has used you. Linda's done." "Where did you?" A stunned Harry couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. Towards the end, when Harry was about to leave, he asked, "Linda, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not now," she shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe, in the future, maybe." "I get it. Get well soon. I'll be stopping by if you don't mind." Harry nodded. "Come over." She blinked, showing agreement. Time goes differently in a small town than it does in a big city. It's measured and quiet. The hustle and bustle is alien to those who are used to getting up to the crowing of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone brightly against the snow. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh and unmarred by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you," Grandmother Emma shouted, coming into the hay and waving the envelopes. "Thank you," Linda shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and Grandma. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter," Grandma Emma said, sitting down on her stool. "You young people are all calling now. A letter from some fiancé." She handed Linda an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Linda went straight to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the betrayal and shame she had experienced. She quit her job, settled other minor issues, and made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so that she would not have to face Ray again. "Out of sight, out of mind," her mother said as she saw her off. "Go as far as you like and come back as often as you like. Only call me often." It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work healing the wounded soul. Her mother didn't talk about Ray and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was all over. The envelope had an address and Harry's name on it. How he knew where to find her remained a mystery. Linda ran her eyes over the lines Harry had written about the divorce, about leaving Catherine with almost nothing. She consciously skipped that part of the letter. Dear Linda, I realize I'm probably an extra person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go. The girl paused, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after those words. I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for a reply, Harry. Linda folded the letter, tucked it away in an envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she was still in doubt at the hospital, she knew for sure now. Grandma Emma came into the room. Do you think what to write back? Questioned the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. I think that old admirers are not invited to a new life. Linda smiled at her grandmother as she tore open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the bin and looked out the window. Grandma, the neighbor's here probably to ask about Daisy again. They're so restless. They'll heal the animal. The old woman shook her hands and shuffled into the hay. Emma remembered very well how her father left the family, trying to take almost everything that could be taken out of the apartment. She then returned quite late from celebrating her friend's birthday and almost fell, tripping over a pile of equipment and things, for some reason piled at the threshold. The girl even thought that someone had gotten into the apartment and was about to jump out into the entrance. But she heard the voices of her parents coming from the large room, which served as both a bedroom and a hall for receiving cheerful companies on holidays. Hastily taking off her boots, hanging her jacket on a hanger and throwing her backpack on the floor, Emma went to find out what was happening. And I found a strange and terrible picture. The parents quarreled as much as never before and did not even pay attention to the daughter who looked into the room. Emma, instead of her adored father, seemed to suddenly see a completely stranger instead. Cruel, screaming, with a pulsating vein in his neck. It seemed that this angry stranger would right now begin to destroy everything in the apartment. But instead, he methodically walked around the room and collected things, without ceasing to swear with his wife. Why did you decide that I was suitable for the role of an idiot? When were you going to tell me the truth? Never. Why were you so sure that I wasn't going anywhere? I thought that I was a complete fool and even stopped hiding my adventures. That's great. Don't think that this will continue. If you file for alimony, you know I will challenge it. Let them do the examination. I now know that all these years I was raising a daughter who was not my own. Emma froze on the threshold, shocked by such strange news. But the girl's mother did not look confused or offended. If she had cried, claimed that a mistake had occurred, and offered to double-check everything, but no. The woman answered her husband no less aggressively. Oh, Andrew, you made me laugh. He doesn't want to pay child support. Will you demand an examination? Who will you make worse off from this? How are you going to explain to Emma that she is no one to you now? Will your heart not yearn for her? Remember how great you play with her, go skiing, even go fishing in the winter and go in the summer. What? Will you forget all this? Will you throw it out of your head like garbage from a bucket? Good father. I instantly forgot my daughter. So the man furiously threw everything in his hands onto the floor and swung his hand to hit his wife, but resisted and shouted. Nike nears him. How can I still treat her if she is a clear reminder of your sin? You knew that I wouldn't forgive betrayal. Why then did you force me, although there was a risk that everything would be revealed, to raise someone else's child? Couldn't you wait for me? I went on long flights for the sake of my family. I tried to earn more money so that you wouldn't need anything. When Emma was born, I began to work even more. Why, with a child in the family, you need so much? But now I don't understand why I sometimes didn't sleep for days. It turns out that I didn't have a family. Only the wife is out for a walk and the child she took on the side. Andrew, well, forgive me, it was a random episode. A burst of passion, nothing more. I tried hundreds of times to explain everything to you, but I was afraid that you wouldn't understand. I'm so dread. The man even found the strength to laugh. You're interesting. In my opinion, I had the right to know the truth from the very beginning. Then it probably wouldn't hurt so much now. I quarreled with my mother for your sake. although she seemed to feel your deceitful nature in her heart. Andrew turned away from Kate so that she would not see the tears in his eyes and noticed Emma frozen in the doorway. The man felt uneasy. He had considered this girl his daughter for so many years that, of course, it was impossible to divorce her overnight. "Sorry, Emma," the man said and began to collect the things he threw away. And then, waving his hand, he sat down on the sofa. Elaine didn't know what to say. The girl solved the problem herself. Approaching the man, she sank down on the floor in front of him so that she could look into his eyes and said quietly, "For me, you will forever remain a real dad. So know that when you want to talk to me, I will always be glad." The man could not restrain himself, and in an impulse hugged the girl, whom he had considered his daughter for 14 years, and headed towards the door. Emma heard the head of the family rattling something in the corridor, but did not go out. In general, this situation seemed like some kind of strange, sticky nightmare to the girl. Only when the front door slammed did she dare to ask, "Mom, how come? Why did Dad decide that I'm not his own daughter?" Kate, who smelled faintly of booze, didn't lie. "Oh, but it's awkward to tell your own daughter this. But you seem to be an adult already, so listen, at least so you don't repeat my mistakes. I married Andrew as soon as I turned 18. He had already served in the army and got a job as a delivery driver. One day I brought some goods to the city, to the store where my mother, your grandmother, was in charge at the time, and he saw me. In general, I began to look after him. But both his mother and mine, of course, were against it. They thought that we were not a couple at all. My mother said that with a villager, I would die of boredom. So she declared that he only knows how to talk about the quality of manure, and it would be a shame to even go to the cinema with him, let alone to the theater. But you must remember your grandmother. You were already 10 years old when she left. Do you remember how she didn't mince words? Her grandmother, after whom she was named, was always, as they say, at the parade. But she could roll out a phrase in such a way that there was no wet spot left. Kate took a breath and continued to share a family secret with her daughter. The woman, the mother, who, like mine, also raised a child alone, did not stand on ceremony in her expressions. She called me a city reveler right to my face. She declared that she would not give her blessing for her son's marriage to a slacker. Well, who and when did young people listen to? We got married, of course. She went to the village. Here I settled in this city apartment. It seemed like we lived nothing. At first, at least, and then money became scarce. My mother refused to help financially. Like the kids themselves, since you already consider yourself such adults that you got married. Andrew's friends told him that cargo transportation was more profitable, and he began to travel. There really was more money. But I'm bored. I then decided to go to the alumni meeting and unwind with one boyfriend who had been courting me since school, seemed to turn my head. It seems like he has started to catch up. I'm not saying that I was directly opposed. Well, of course, I had no reason to be proud of myself. It turns out that you really are not his daughter, but your real biological father, by the way, learned from me that you were born. But by this time he was already getting ready to get married and had no intention of changing anything in his life. So I had to keep lying. His mother, as soon as she saw you tiny, began to insist that you were not their breed. At most, he came to visit several times and made her whole face look as if she had eaten a lemon without sugar, wincing so much that it was disgusting to look at. She never invited me to relax. My mother-in-law could not know for sure that I had cheated on her son, but she was convinced of it, and she didn't need proof. Andrew, I'm sure she was constantly blowing into her ears that you were not his daughter. Yes, apparently she planted doubts in his head, although it took many years. But Andrew has changed for me today, your father. That is, not really, but in general. Xenia began to make complaints to me out of the blue that I didn't take care of the house, that I was returning from work drunk. He began to reproach me for setting a bad example for his daughter, that is, for you. In general, I couldn't stand it in the heat of the moment. Blurted out everything that I had been keeping secret for a long time. Blurted out that you were not his daughter. So stupidly, with your own tongue, you destroyed the fragile balance. What, Emma? Are you going to blame me for not being able to save my family? The girl did not understand what to do. She was drawn to her father, and paradoxically, she also felt sorry for her mother. And it was also incredibly painful that the familiar world was collapsing. In Emma's class, there were many students from single-parent families. They seemed to be trying to pretend that the presence of both dad and mom together was indifferent to them, but the girl still caught the inadvertently manifested notes of envy. Emma was sincerely happy, considering her parents quite happy. Until this evening, her family seemed like a calm haven to her. And now it turns out that there was no idol, total pretense. There was nothing left of Emma's good mood with which she crossed the threshold of her house. It's an unclear, and therefore even more frightening, prospect loomed ahead. Before the court hearing, at which Emma was supposed to be asked which parent she wanted to stay with, Andrew approached her. He did not look the girl in the eyes and said, "Now, when I'm not traveling, I live with my mother in the village. It's cheaper and more convenient. I won't object to the payment of alimony, but you understand that I won't be able to take you in with me. Moreover, you are aware of the whole truth, and I'm afraid you won't find a common language with my mother. I raised you, but for her, you are a complete stranger. So ask the court to live with your mother." Emma flared up and, without being embarrassed by anyone, shouted, "Man, fuck you with your alimony. And a crazy grandmother who I don't even remember where to go. I don't need anything from you. I'll get by." Kate, who was talking about something a little further away with an acquaintance she had met by chance, jumped up to her daughter and almost ex-husband and took the enraged Emma away from Andrew. The girl, sobbing, asked, "Now let's live without his help. I don't want to see him anymore since he decided to eliminate me from his life." The divorce procedure for Kate and Andrew did not take much time. The court made all the required rulings, and the former spouses began a new stage in their lives. It seems that there were no major changes in the routine because the head of the family was not at home for a long time. But the situation became somewhat nervous. Kate, like many women, after the fateful changes, got a new haircut and began to pay special attention to her appearance. Of course, Emma wanted her mother to be happy. In any case, Emma did not reproach her mother, and she reacted quite tolerantly to the news, which came less than a year after the final point in the family's unhappy history. "In general, daughter, they will come to visit us this evening. Freddie, this is my friend, and his son George. I have 2 requests for you. First, help me clean up. Secondly, I want you to make a good impression on our guests. So don't dress provocatively." With this hopelessly ruined Saturday, a continuous series of troubles began for Emma. Kate literally crumbled in front of the guests, offering to try either a salad or baked meat. The lordly manners of Freddie, who presented the owners of the apartment with 2 pitiful bouquets of 3 tulips each, looking as if they were at least 1,000,000 scarlet roses, infuriated Emma. His son George caused even greater antipathy. He was only a year older than Emma, and with some pride told everyone present that he did not intend to waste time studying at school, and after finishing the 9th grade he would apply to college. Freddie nodded contentedly, listening to his son, and Kate, who always told her daughter that she should definitely get a higher education, also approved of this decision, but at the same time asked worriedly, "Well done, George, but probably in college there is no deferment from the army." The guy grinned, "So I don't need her. I have chronic flat feet. I'm like my dad." In the middle of the evening, Freddie proposed, and Emma was offended that her mother did not even consult her, but immediately agreed. Probably it would have been easier for Emma to accept the next changes if her mother and Freddie had not decided to settle in the bride's spacious apartment and rent out the groom's home. When the guests, to the girl's relief, left, Emma, clearing the table, asked her mother, "Why did your fiancé and son decide to live with us if they have their own apartment? This is my joy, to make room for the sake of strangers." Aunt Pate was indignant. "No one will crowd you. We will accommodate George in the walk-through room. Your nursery will remain yours, and my room will remain mine." Emma tried to explain her point of view. It still turns out to be some kind of hostel. In my opinion, this is wrong. I can't even walk in my own house without clothes in the heat. Pleasure is below par. If you are interested in my opinion, it would be ideal if this Freddie of yours invited you to live with him. And I can handle the housework here without any problems. Kate was adamant, and then confessed, "We will need money soon. So you will have to rent out the apartment. I'm expecting Freddie's baby." Emma understood that her mother was still quite a young 34-year-old woman, and this scenario was quite predictable. However, the prospect loomed not only of constantly seeing a stranger and an unattractive guy, but also of becoming a nanny. She completely destroyed all the joy that the parent had found her happiness. Freddie, unlike the one whom Emma had long considered her father, did not bother himself with work at all, and most often lay on the sofa. George, to the girl's great joy, did not flash before her eyes for very long. One day he simply packed his things into a bag and, asking his father for money, In general, I'm moving to live with a girl. Everything seems to be fine with her. Besides, her parents moved abroad and it takes me 3 minutes to walk from their house to college. Waddle. All. Don't be bored. Or send money. Kidding. I will come for financial support myself. Kate tried to be indignant, reminding her stepson that he had only recently turned 16 years old. But he grinned brazenly and said, "But you should be jumping for joy that I'm moving out, and not pretending to be a caring mother hen." Besides, the guy nodded at his stepmother's already noticeable belly. "You will soon have noise, screams, and the stench of a child here. Why the hell do I need such happiness?" Freddie did not scold him for his rather impudent approach to his stepmother, but took money out of his wallet and, handing it to his son, muttered kind, "That's it, come on, go, the philosopher has been found." He took the bill handed to him and, picking up his bag, left. Just before the year 2000, problem and possible computer equipment failures were seriously discussed on TV. Emma had a half-sister, and so New Year's Eve spent with friends became practically the last island of calm in the period after my parents' divorce. Emma had fun, sang songs, and desperately hoped that the gloomy forebodings would not come true. However, everything turned out even worse than one might have expected. More than 3 years from the moment the mother brought the bundle with her youngest daughter from the maternity hospital, her eldest got the worst of it. It was Emma who most often changed her sister's diapers, threw them in the laundry, hung up the laundry, and so on in an endless circle. Freddie laughed from the sofa, looking at his stepdaughter and turning to his wife. Kate, you're great. You made a fuss about giving birth when you were young. First she got a nanny and then a cradle. Even preparing for exams was not considered a valid reason for not doing some homework. Only once, when Emma's temperature rose above 39 degrees, was she mercifully allowed to undergo treatment. Ira now sided with Freddie in all disputes. With her tacit consent, the stepson could take something he liked from Emma's house or ask Emma for a sum of money even without a promise to give it back. And there was no question of Emma buying anything for herself without her own money. The mother-in-law generally treated the girl like an empty place or a servant. And when visiting, she never brought the girl a single apple. Although despite the fact that he lived separately, she carried early fruits and sweets in bags to her adult grandson and her own granddaughter. Freddie then picked up the gifts intended for George and took them to his girlfriend's apartment. Simple-minded Anne, who from infancy saw Emma next to her much more often than her mother, treated her sister with the gifts she had received. But the girl didn't have the conscience to eat the child. In such conditions, Emma considered entering a pedagogical school on a budget to be a real miracle and made every effort not to be expelled from there. However, this became increasingly difficult. Another morning in the family began with a scandal. Mom shouted that it was time to get up and take her daughter to kindergarten. The girl resisted sluggishly. "Mom, but I can't do it today. I don't have the strength." Asked Freddie to take his own daughter, by the way, at least once. "Yesterday, after everyone else, I washed the dishes again. Only at 4 am I printed the abstract. I have my second day today, so I can easily sleep longer and not trudge through the disgusting weather to this equally disgusting kindergarten." Emma also wanted to add that she actually didn't ask Anne's mother to give birth, but she bit her tongue just in time. It was not the girl's fault at all that the main concerns about her were dumped on her older sister. However, even without this phrase, a quarrel broke out. Kate screamed in unison with Freddie that she, Emma, was completely ungrateful and didn't remember any kindness at all. "By the way, it's me, you slacker, who feeds and sings." However, there was nothing unusual in these reproaches. Probably, if Emma had not been so tired, she would have remained silent, as happened most often. But everything just came together. Workload with studies, part-time work, household responsibilities, generously placed on her by the rest of the family, irritation from the invasion of a strange man's apartment, and lack of sleep formed an explosive mixture. The girl fell asleep from fatigue, as she was in her home sports suit, jumped up sharply and, standing in front of her stepfather, began to reprimand him for everything that had accumulated. "Something I don't see is that your highness is overworking. Your mother is carrying everything on herself, and it's getting to me too. I really love Anne, but Freddie, it's time for you to do something for your daughter." "Oh, drone, that's who you are." The girl instinctively dodged, noticing how her stepfather's palm was flying in her direction, deciding to slap her in the face. Walking past her mother and running out of the room, Emma found George in the corridor. Friends that the guy was just taking off his shoes and muttered in greeting, "Immediate." I haven't eaten since yesterday's lunch. She started a scandal with me out of the blue and didn't even let me go home. I've been staggering all night and my stomach is just cramping from hunger. Come on, get moving. March to the kitchen. By the way, what's the food today? It would be nice to have some soup. Do you have any candy for tea? If not, go to the store. Emma, already angry about the quarrel, did not stand on ceremony. And what you brought with you is what you will eat. Ends of the hallway, where a new squabble threatened to flare up. Freddie has already come out. He asked his son, me, why did you show up without even warning? Where else should I go if you, my only relative, live here? In the gateway, perhaps to live. In short, you'll have to make room. Now I will live here too. Emma's mood was completely ruined. One could not even dream of going now and at least getting some more sleep or just relaxing. George will definitely start eating plates now, turn on the TV at full volume, laugh, and make belching sounds. The girl muttered. I'll take Anne to kindergarten, immediately grabbing a backpack with rags. Emma led her little sister to the kindergarten, answering the girl's numerous questions along the way. However, the girl thought in her mind, how will everything fit in the apartment now? Just in the walk-through room, which George seemed to have previously wanted to give away. Anne has settled down, but now she will have to free up the territory for her blood brother. It's somehow wrong to place a girl's bed next to her mother and stepfather. This means that she will have to make room because it is simply impossible to get into the college dormitory. With sadness, the girl thought about the man whom she had long considered her father. However, after his mother divorced him, Emma saw Andrew at most 5 times, and even then, somehow in a hurry while running, passing by, he handed her gifts and, without even really talking, moved. For more than a year now, he had not seen her at all. The last conversation on the phone was crumpled. As the girl understood, Andrew was trying to cope with a personal tragedy, loading himself with work beyond measure. Attempts to call him were unsuccessful, but there were no replies to the SMS sent. Probably, if Mom had kept quiet about the secret of her birth, everything would still be fine with them. Now the girl has to suffer for her mother's old sin. As expected, in the evening the furniture was rearranged in the apartment, and with Anne's bed there was even less free space in the already small girl's room. But there was no other choice. The girl flatly refused to be accommodated in the walk-through room, which prompted a contemptuous remark from George. Oh, you'd think someone would look at you. However, the guy was clearly lying. Emma noticed that he did not miss the opportunity to look at her unhindered. Since George moved into the apartment, the situation has gotten even worse. When no one was looking, the guy made obscene proposals to his stepsister, although he later reduced them to jokes. He hit the girl with slashes and slaps in the area below her back and laughed impudently in her face, noticing the fear in Emma's eyes. The girl repeatedly complained to her mother, who promised to deal with her stepson, but the conversation did not have any positive effect. George didn't care about Kate at all and, rolling his eyes, imagined the whole situation in such a way that it was naughty, but Emma who was pestering him. And Freddie, who was advised by his stepdaughter to reason with his son, began to defend him. And you turn your sirloin smaller in front of George, also for me, depicting holy innocence. There is generally no place to test on modern girls. Emma realized that there would be no help from her mother, much less from her arrogant husband. Sometimes George went somewhere for several days. Only then did Emma sigh relatively calmly. One summer morning, Anne was taken to kindergarten by her mother, who needed to leave the house early so her eldest daughter could sleep a little longer, gaining strength before the last exam. However, Emma was in vain to rejoice at such luck, because while she was taking a shower, George opened the door to the bathroom in the most unceremonious manner, tearing out the latch on one side. Smirking, George said to his stepsister, hiding behind a translucent curtain, "Hey, move over. Or should we start with me rubbing your back?" Grabbing the first bottle she came across from the shelf, the girl threw it at the impudent man. It's unlikely that this could have scared him off, but someone rang the doorbell of the apartment demandingly. George muttered that he had been interrupted at the most interesting point and trudged off to see who had come. Emma hurriedly put on her robe and ran into the room to get dressed, but the strength of the door did not inspire confidence in the girl. And quickly getting dressed, she took pepper spray out of her backpack, deciding to use it without any warning if George got in her way. Without even drying her hair, she began to make her way to the exit. And fortunately, she did not meet her stepbrother. Judging by the sound of the water, he was in the bathroom. The girl was furious. She was running out of patience. Of course, she could change the protection to a stronger one, but she understood that this would not solve the main problem. She is defenseless in front of George, who does whatever he pleases. The girl did not intend to become a victim, so she planned a serious conversation for the evening. Having passed the last difficult exam scheduled for that day, even better than could have been expected after the stress experienced in the morning, and thus closing the summer session, Emma was glad that at least this problem was behind her. As agreed, the girl followed her sister into the kindergarten, and on the way home she was thinking about how to start a conversation with all the inhabitants of the apartment. The girl didn't want her little sister to witness the scandal, but she could be sent to the nursery to watch cartoons. What child would refuse? Meanwhile, she will put before everyone the main question that George living in the apartment is in no way acceptable. After Anne rushed off to the nursery, Emma asked to stay in the kitchen for Freddie, who was about to go to Emma's favorite sofa in front of the TV. George clearly did not expect that Emma would dare to talk about his morning prank and immediately began to make excuses. I didn't know that the bathroom was occupied. It was obvious that he was lying, and the girl blushed with indignation. Oh, what a dunno. Didn't the fact that the water was on and the bathroom door was closed from the inside tell you anything? Why are you lying? The girl sighed in order to calm down at least a little, keep an even tone of voice and not scare Anne with her scream, and she continued. In general, George, I can't stay under the same roof with you. Nothing good will come of it. With Mom and Freddie, you still somehow play the role of a simpleton. But as soon as you and I are alone, how do you behave? It was noticeable that George was nervous, but was trying to find an excuse. How serious you are. I just wanted to joke. Just think, beauty. Do you even look at yourself in the mirror? I won't have any reaction to your appearance. A liter of wine won't be enough to make you want to look at you. Emma was not affected by her stepbrother's ridicule, and she gave her mother an ultimatum. You can't live like this any longer. I am very concerned about George's behavior. Mom, in short, either you kick him out or I'm leaving. Betty had been silent before, but intervened in the conversation. No, so go away. Get down on all four sides. You provoked George yourself. As the saying goes, it is true that if the dog doesn't want to, then the dog won't jump up either. It wasn't enough for you to accuse him of committing any illegal actions. Come on, get lost. There is no point in throwing mud at my son here. Emma was offended not so much because of her stepfather's words, but because her mother didn't even think to protect her. Kate was silent. She generally acted as if she had already talked about this topic with Freddie for a long time and decided everything was not in favor of her daughter. Mom, why are you silent? What? You can't even say a word in defense of your daughter, whom your husband is now insulting. Or do you also think that I'm provoking? Or is the presence of pants in the house more important to you with what will happen to your daughter even with two? Anne is also in danger. You never know what will hit this George in the head. She is small, and he will generally be able to cope with her. Freddie got furious. You rubbish. Keep your filthy tongue shut. Once again, I hear such suspicions towards George, and you'll instantly fly out of the apartment. From her stepfather's impudence, Emma was even confused for a few moments. She had no decent words. And then she, trying not to scream, asked, Is it okay that this is my mother's apartment and I am registered here? How am I going to fly out of here? Maybe you and your youngest will liberate the territory. It's high time for George to join the army. But you made a fuss, somehow got him off. And now this slacker is groping me out of excess strength. So let him get out of here before I break his empty head. When will he pinch me again or dirty me with his eyes? Let this precious one go to his apartment, which is for rent, or, in the end, let him rent. Better yet, both drones, get out of here. Kate did not know how to extinguish the conflict that had broken out in the family and asked, Let us all calm down, and tomorrow we will calmly decide everything. Emma was unpleasant about her mother's attitude, but she was so tired of arguing and fighting for her right to live in safety that she didn't even wash the dishes, as her stepfather tried to order, and went to bed. Emma had gloomy premonitions. Judging by my mother's behavior, she is not going to drive any of the men away. This means she will have to leave. Okay, at least the session is left behind. You can, as an option, ask to go to a children's camp somewhere, even if not as a counselor, as long as she doesn't stay here in her home apartment, where she no longer feels at ease. There was no sleep in either eye when she heard someone approach the room. From the creaking of the floors, the girl realized that the person on the other side of the door was trampling. Apparently, he listens to understand whether the girls are sleeping or not. It seems that the situation did not arouse any suspicion. The door handle slid down, and in the opening the girl made out the silhouette of George. He walked towards her bed and almost jumped when Emma's quiet voice rang out. "If you take another step in my direction, I'll wake up the whole house. You will explain what you are doing in the girl's bedroom." He also answered in a whisper, "It scared me. I'll think something." The stepbrother was approaching, and Emma, without hesitation, screamed. She screamed at the top of her lungs, as if freeing herself from accumulated irritation and anger. The girl no longer cared. She was not stopped by the fact that the awakened Anne and the neighbor downstairs, a not quite adequate bilious man, knocked on the radiator. Emma did not stop screaming even when her mother and stepfather appeared in the room. The girl fell silent only when Kate splashed a glass of water on her younger daughter's nightstand in her face. This did not calm the girl down, but made her cough from the liquid that got into her mouth. Anne came in crying. Kate reprimanded Emma about her selfishness and bad upbringing, but the girl didn't care. Under this terrible cacophony, Emma hastily collected her things. "I won't stay here for a second longer. I seriously doubt that George showed up here in the middle of the night to ask for forgiveness. In general, Mom, I wouldn't expect you to pay for your share in this apartment or completely remove this bastard from my field of vision." Freddie looked with clearly discernible anger first at George, then at his furious stepdaughter, and did not react at all to his daughter. Kate, clutching her head, went to get some medicine, reporting to nowhere. "Lord, what kind of disgusting thing is it to organize a material showdown in the middle of the night? I need to take a sedative." Emma sat down next to Anne, stroked her head, said goodbye, and passing by the kitchen, where her mother was sitting at the table, reminded her, "I'm waiting for a call as soon as possible. I'll come for the rest of the things later. I hope everything will be safe." The girl was shaking with anger, but she stubbornly walked to the station to go to the only person who could help her. In the waiting room, Emma opened a notebook for secrets, which it seems was given to her by her neighbor in either the 3rd or 4th grade, and I found the entry among the pages of the desired one. Andrew wrote this line a long time ago, when the girl still had what she thought was a strong, happy family, and said that this was his mother's name and her address. The man promised that one day they would all go to visit her to try to overcome past differences. The girl got her bearings and bought a ticket to the station closest to the one she needed. Judging by the information, we would have to walk about 4 kilometers, but this was not what confused Emma. She thought hard about what to say to Jane and how to introduce herself to her. Your son's ex-daughter, your ex-daughter-in-law's daughter, Andrew's friend, the one he considered his daughter for a long time. The girl looked through the options, but could not find the perfect one. But getting to the destination turned out to be as easy as shelling piers. And soon Emma was already standing at the fence with a sign attached to it with the desired address. The girl did not dare introduce herself to the woman in a tracksuit who was clearing the front garden of weeds. And apparently, it was Jane. And just ask, "Hello, can I see Andrew?" The girl did not even imagine that completely harmless phrases could produce such an effect. The woman threw herself on the ground and began to howl like a wounded animal. Emma hesitated only for a few seconds, and then, throwing her things, opened the gate and ran up to the woman. "No, Jane, get up. How can I help you?" The crying woman did not immediately begin to calm down, and only after a few minutes, Emma was able to lift her from the ground and bring her to a bench under a tree. Jane blew her nose noisily into a rag she took out of her pocket and ordered, "From home, bring me a mug of water and pills from the refrigerator." Emma ran into the house and, having quickly found all the necessary medicines, rushed to look for a mug when she noticed a photo of Andrew on the table with a black ribbon at an angle. The girl felt sad to the point of tears. She sniffled. Andrew was the only person whom the girl considered a father. And although due to Kate's fault, the relationship between the imaginary relatives was destroyed, Emma still missed him. She now understood what caused such a violent reaction from Jane, and was completely at a loss how to explain who she was and why she had come, so as not to torment the heart of the poor woman who had lost her son even more. If it weren't for the girl bringing Jane pills and water, and when she took the medicine, she asked, "Maybe we should call the doctors." Jane Ivanovna shook her head, and then wiped her eyes from tears and began to study the uninvited guest. The look in her eyes suddenly became prickly and angry. The woman painfully poked Emma in the stomach and began to accuse, "It's your fault that you and your mother are walking. They killed my son. Do you live happily ever after? Oh, you're a reptile. You weren't even embarrassed to come here to see me. Yes, if it weren't for your demon mother, you wouldn't have fooled my son. Now I know for sure he would be living with some worthy woman." I immediately told him, "As soon as I saw you a newborn, that Kate is rubbish and is someone else's child and is trying to tie him to herself." Didn't listen. And this is the result. He crashed his car, and it was as if he had never existed in the world. He didn't even leave me a granddaughter or grandson. They buried the damp earth, and that's all. There was Andrew. He is not there. Only the grave remains. Get out of my yard no matter what you came for. My eyes wouldn't see you. The woman, breathing heavily, rose from the bench and began to advance on the guest, showering her with choice abuse. Emma muttered an apology that Jane didn't seem to even hear and ran out of the yard, picking up her things thrown by the fence. The girl decided to visit Andrew's last shelter. Still, she could not perceive him as a stranger. She saw where the cemetery was when she walked to the house, and it was not difficult to find the grave of the son of such a hostess who was so angry with her, a simple cross with a photograph and a plaque with 2 dates. That's all that's left of Andrew. Emma, as if all restrictions had been removed from her, began to tell everything that tormented her in front of the grave. Tears flowed down her cheeks, and she kept complaining. "Daddy, I don't know what to do at all. I need to look for housing because my heart feels that my mother is not going to exchange the apartment. I don't want to huddle there with these people. And it's just a pity. But not only can I help her, I can't help myself either." Of course, Emma did not expect that inspiration would descend on her in the graveyard and she would understand how to act further. But after talking out loud about my misadventures and sobbing, wistful emptiness set in. Having said goodbye, Emma came in from the side and, holding out her hand, stroked the photo of Andrew. "Goodbye, and don't be offended if I can't come for a long time." Emma wandered back. There were logs piled up near a fence near some house, and the girl decided to find out if there was any live-in work in the town next to the village. She took out her phone and became despondent. The smart device, the first assistant of a modern person, was completely discharged. Even without this trouble, my nerves were on edge. And although Emma thought she had no more tears left, she burst into tears again. The girl did not notice anything around, not even the buzzing of mosquitoes trying to sting unprotected parts of the body. Emma almost jumped when a mocking male voice was heard above her head. "Pearl, have you decided to build a pond here? But this is no good. We specially stacked the logs here for wiretapping, but here you are silent about them. Get up and come with me." Emma raised her head, wiped away her tears, and looked at a handsome man of about 25 years old standing in front of her. The stranger extended his hand to her. "Well, what kind of tragedy happened?" Emma did not share the details with the man and blamed her tears on her dead phone. "If you have a charger, then this is not a problem. My house is behind you. There will be a free socket. Let's go too." The man extended his hand to the girl, but Emma did not dare trust the stranger. "Ted, he ate you." A woman walking down the street shouted, "Who is sitting under our fence?" "Ted is me, and this is my mother coming." Judging by the bags, the evening bus arrived and the driver and sister gave us gifts. "I'll run now, I'll meet my mother, but don't go anywhere. We'll solve the problem with your phone." Emma had nowhere to go. Without the information support of her smartphone, she felt too insecure, and suddenly afraid that she might have forgotten the charger during her hasty preparations. The girl opened her bag and began to look for it. To my great joy, I had it with me. Emma exhaled. Now all that remains is to find a place with an outlet. She could try a local store, but she had no idea what hours they were open until, having taken the bags from his mother, walked first and, hugging the girl, asks, "Well, now aren't you afraid to go into the house? We won't be alone." Emma replied, "I'm not afraid, but it's probably not very convenient." "No. Come on. What's your name, by the way? Otherwise, my mother won't understand that I'm taking an unfamiliar girl into the house so easily." "Emma. Well, it's very nice. Take your things and follow me. You will meet your mother at the house. Otherwise, I see that you have already been bitten by mosquitoes." Richard put his bags on the floor in the kitchen and started charging his phone. "But it seems to be blinking. Now you have to wait a little, and then you can turn it on and use it. Thank you." Emma began to thank, but didn't have time to finish. The mistress of the house appeared in the kitchen, breathing noisily. Looking carefully at the guest, she rested her hands on her wide sides and asked her son, "Ted, is this girl not one of ours? Explain who this is. Did you meet at our house or what?" "Mom, this is Emma." "Emma, this is my mother, Mary." The woman frowned. "I needed to see Andrew." Emma paused to control her emotions and continued, "Unfortunately, I was late." Mary turned to Ted. "No, this is not my own daughter. She complained at the bus stop. She says she came, gave me a heart attack and left somewhere, but it couldn't resist making an ironic remark. If my aunt had a heart attack, well, would she not go to the first aid station, but go to the bus stop? Are there any alternative methods of treatment practiced there?" Mary, as if not noticing the guest, answered her son. "Oh, Ted, you just need to be sarcastic. She wanted to pull this girl by her hair. She said that she regretted that she didn't give her mother a kick in the ass. When Andrew brought her to the house to meet her, the mother immediately guessed that her son would be unhappy with this woman. That's how it happened. But do you remember what kind of city he returned from a few years ago? They put it in a coffin, honestly. The women said that he brought almost nothing with him. He left everything to his wife and not his own daughter, this Emma. Betchins. They say that Kate cheated on him even in marriage. Bless you." Van winced. "Mom, you know that I try not to listen to gossip." Mary waved her hand and turned to the girl to satisfy her Emma experience. "Where have you been?" "She sat here under our fence the whole time." "Why didn't you go straight to the station?" Emma replied. "I went to the churchyard. You may not believe it, but I really feel sorry for Dad. I never knew another father. It was he who wiped my tears. When I got bad grades at school, he gave me my first bouquet of flowers and carried me on his shoulders. I even braided my hair when my mother had no time. It's not easy to immediately lose such family relationships. I sat on the grave and didn't even notice how much time I spent there." Her heart trembled, but she asked, "Why did you stop at our house where I could sit down?" "I stopped there. I'm sorry I bothered you. Now the phone will charge a little, and I will leave." Ted smiled. "And where are you going to go at night? A young and beautiful girl is hardly worth taking risks." "Mom, let's make Emma sleep on the sofa in the summer kitchen. It's warm now and she won't freeze. I can take her tomorrow morning." Mary was indignant. "That is, you don't have time to go to your aunt and pick up the transmitter, and how to go for a ride with a girl. So for the sweet soul. Although, by the way, it's not dark yet. You can pick berries, peas, and strawberries today and radishes and onions tomorrow morning. It will be fresher. You will take everything to your aunt. Let him sell it. Now the first greens, the berries are expensive." The woman turned her gaze to Emma and demanded. "In general, while your phone is charging, let's go. Will you help me? I need to rest before I go on the road tomorrow morning." Although picking small berries was not the most common thing for Emma, she coped with the task quite quickly. Slowly but surely, the cups were filled with ripe berries. As Mary ordered, Emma did not fill them to the top and put them in a box with cells. When the two bushes were freed from their burden, Mary called to the girl, "Come." When Emma approached, the woman outlined a new area of work for her. "Here, look, the pea blades are neat and not all in a row. Oh, and I also need to give you a bed." Emma nodded. She herself wanted to at least somehow thank the people who decided to shelter her. The girl did not feel the strength to go somewhere right now. It was necessary to have at least a short respite after the earlier harvest had been harvested. Mary invited both her son and her guest to the table. Only at that moment, when the girl smelled potatoes stewed with meat, did she realize that all day she had been refreshed only by pastries and soda at the station. Trying not to look hungry, Emma started eating. However, she was prevented from completely relaxing by the attentive, searching glances that Ted threw at her. The man really liked the girl. Slender, modest, it was clear that she did not have a nasty Caroline sides. Went with his mother to the garden without any problems. And she didn't even express her dissatisfaction with a gesture. And this despite the fact that it was obvious. The girl was clearly a city girl, unaccustomed to fresh air. There he sits as if after tea, almost asleep. But the conversation that her mother has with her, asking about her life, supports her. Ted didn't listen much to the dialogue. But he even felt sorry for the guest who ended up being interrogated instead of dinner, and he decided to end the torment of the unfortunate woman. "Mom, we are leaving early tomorrow. The guest has already made her bed linen. Otherwise, he simply won't be able to wake up on time tomorrow." Emma, who was really very tired both physically and mentally, looked at the man with gratitude. And Ted realized that he wanted the girl to always look at him like that. He liked her more and more every minute. In the morning, Ted drove Emma to the district center and, getting ready to park near his aunt's house, asked the girl, "Nee, listen, did you head further to your native land or what?" The girl shrugged. "Don't know. Still need to think. My way home is blocked. I'll probably look for a place in some children's institution. Of course, I don't have a diploma yet, but I do have my record book with me. Maybe someone would take pity on the student. I need a vacancy with accommodation." He'd slapped his forehead and say, "Listen, how come I didn't think of it right away? Now let's go to my aunt's together. Maybe she will need an assistant for the summer season. She lives in the apartment alone." So Emma ended up in a small town 100 kilometers from her hometown with Aunt Ellen. The apartment was decorated in a minimalist style, and the girl did not feel very comfortable in it. After a short introduction, the hostess asked Emma to sit in the kitchen, and she and her nephew went into the back room and asked, "Well, why did you bring this girl here for me? By the way, I have a decent apartment. Your mother already called me and warned me that you might not come alone. And with this one, which our Andrew raised for so many years as his own." The nephew was spared the need to tell the woman the situation. "That's it. You won't be alone." And grimaced, "No, Ted. I don't understand who I can't trust. After all, trade is such a thing. Moreover, this girl's mother and I have our own scores to settle. You were very little when Andrew brought this FIFA to the village to show, although before that he wanted to marry me, by the way. How can I live in the same apartment with the daughter of this impudent woman? This Emma has a rotten family. So, nephew, I'm sorry, I tried to convince his aunt, but it seems children are not responsible for the sins of their fathers. More precisely, in this case, mothers are not responsible. Emma looks quite adequate. So I think you won't regret it. Don't even try to persuade me. Do you want to help this girl? Give him money to go home and let him settle down somewhere in his big city. There are also higher salaries." And the hostess and her nephew entered the kitchen, and Helen said bluntly, "I'm sorry, but I have my own personal life, and your presence would be out of place. And I don't need helpers. As they say, I can handle everything myself." However, Ted did not want to part with the beautiful Emma, and he feverishly thought about how to get her phone number. Much to the man's surprise, the girl was not upset at all, but was even happy. "It's very good that it's not necessary. I was looking through advertisements on my phone for a special boarding house, which somewhere, judging by the map here in the area, a cleaner is needed. It's not a very prestigious profession, of course, but I won't give up. In addition, accommodation and meals are provided, just a fabulous offer. The only negative is that, as the smartphone suggested, there is no public transport to this boarding house, so I had to order a taxi. In general, a wild number appeared on the screen. I just ask you to lend me some money to get there. As soon as I receive my first salary, I will transfer it to you immediately." No. What if you suddenly come there, look, and don't like it? Let me take it to you. I'll wait to make sure everything is fine, and only then will I leave." Helen, who involuntarily heard this dialogue taking place in her kitchen, was not too surprised by her nephew. Ted has always been very empathetic, from early childhood. I remember that at the age of 6, he brought a girl from a neighboring street to his home, and said that this was his fiancée who would live with him. He also had several girls at school. At least 3 girls cried for him, but he grew old and, after serving, returned to the village with his bride. She, however, could not live like this for long under the yoke of the Midge and left for her homeland without waiting for the wedding march. As far as Helen knew, Ted was not at all upset about the failed marriage. It seems that he even breathed a sigh of relief and continued to lead a completely unmonastic lifestyle. And now the woman noticed a familiar spark of excitement in her nephew's eyes. The hunter has already had his eye on his next victim. Perhaps this poor fellow should have been warned, but Helen chose not to interfere. First of all, Emma was clearly of age, based on what the woman knew. Secondly, she has her own scores to settle with this person's mother. Thirdly, Helen knew her nephew. If he wants to get a girl, then he will get her. So let them do whatever they want, just don't touch her. Ted gallantly opened the car door for Emma, and Helen, watching the couple from the window, realized that the naive-looking young lady would have practically no chance to resist. The woman's instincts and experience did not disappoint. It had really managed to win Emma over, although, of course, he had to try. Basically, the thoughts of the girl, who was hired for seasonal work in a boarding house, were occupied with the problem of housing. Emma called her mother to find out how she was going to solve the pressing housing issue, but Kate asked to give her more time. Almost every time she answered the same no. Daughter, it's not that simple. We only have a 2-room apartment in a residential area of the city and not a mansion on the main street. If you arrange an exchange for 2 apartments, then nothing good will come of it. Mom, why did you decide to change our apartment? Think about the fact that this is your marriage home. If you decide to exchange it and then buy another apartment, then your hubby will be able to claim part of it if something happens. It seems to me that the easiest way is to move George into the apartment that his father rents out. From the silence that hung on the phone for a few seconds, Emma guessed that there was some problem that she didn't know about and asked directly, Mother, just answer me honestly, what's wrong with your Freddie's apartment? Does he even have one? Or has he been lying to you all these years? Parker sighed and admitted. Freddie had an apartment, but he had to urgently sell it in order to save George from prison. It turned out that Helga threw him out of her home and life for a reason. Freddie didn't tell me everything in detail, but the story could not have ended well for George. It's good that the injured party agreed not to contact the police, and the matter was settled peacefully. In general, this is the situation, daughter. Emma constantly tried to convey to her mother the idea that a person who had to buy freedom at the price of an apartment could be dangerous. Mom, do you understand that you are putting yourself and Anne in danger? Obviously, George didn't pick flowers from a flower bed or took change from other people's pockets. It turns out he committed a rather serious crime. And Daddy, work hard. Instead of allowing his son to go where he belonged, he sold the apartment and paid off fair retribution. Well, okay, Freddie is not afraid of his offspring, but why do you allow George to be with you, Anne, under the same roof? Let him work, rent an apartment for himself, preferably further away. Emma was not so much tired from the work, which, to be honest, was a lot, but from the constant persuasion. She couldn't convince her mother to change her mind and push her to block George's access to the apartment. The only outlet for the girl was communication with Dima. The man came to see her every weekend, and sometimes on weekdays. During meetings, he showered me with compliments and brought various sweets and natural village products. The fewer days remained until the end of the last shift, the more worried Emma became. Without even knowing what to say, the decisive factor was one of the conversations with Dima, who, hugging her tightly, whispered in her ear, "Oh, Emma, my Emma, she just bewitched me. How will I live without you? I don't even know. Let's transfer to correspondence and move in with me. I will be lost without you. I will wither away. I understand that you are all so lofty and Emma was silent, but she liked the idea of moving. She herself felt that Emma had fallen into this man who cared so much about her. Besides, if she accepts the invitation, she won't have to return to her mother's apartment and look at the disgusting faces of Freddie and his offspring. Of course, it will take longer to study in absentia, but it will be possible to live with Emma's loved one, even without formalizing the relationship. While the girl was thinking, Ted whispered, "Don't think so. I'm not just suggesting you come and live. I understand that this is probably important to you. Just a little before the wedding happens, you will come to me. That's all." Emma looked Ted in the eye to make sure he was serious. As if sensing a shadow of doubt, confirmed, "Yes, I propose to you to get married. You usually have to wait a month from the moment you submit your application until it is signed. But this means practically nothing. You will live as a wife." From the very first day Emma crossed the threshold of the house, she was spinning in a whirlpool of happy worries. The mother did not feel joy that her son brought Emma home as a bride, hearing laughter from Ted's room. Lemon frowned with disgust and quietly whispered, "They are having fun. If only they were ashamed of me." They decided to have the wedding on seemingly neutral territory, near which Emma spent the summer. The bride, who already knew that she had become pregnant by Emma Ted, did not want a large celebration and was glad that her future mother-in-law supported her. "Oh, but now it's no longer fashionable to gather the whole village." "Yes, and that's correct. The money that would be wasted on food and drink would be better spent on something useful. The car needs to be replaced, the roof needs to be patched, and you should buy a bed that's not so squeaky." Mary couldn't resist mocking. As a result, Emma invited only her mother and Anne to sit in a modest cafe. Under no circumstances did she want to see Freddie and George at the table on a holiday. From the groom's side, only his mother came. Aunt Helen flatly refused to participate in the celebration. Both Ted, privy to the long history with Andrew, and the bride's mother understood why. Anne sat on her lap for almost the entire lunch. When, after modest gatherings, the bride's relatives and the newlyweds and their mother had to go in different directions, the girl even cried. Emma also began to cry, In general, she had difficulty controlling her emotions and nerves. After a month of living there, the restless Mary's nerves were stretched to the limit. The woman literally did not allow me to lie down and rest. All she had for Emma was to work in the garden and greenhouse, roll up jars with the harvest, cook and clean the house. Everything had to be done by the bride. He, of course, helped as much as possible. But Mary, noticing, for example, her son peeling onions for preparation, almost cursed him out of the kitchen. What did you come up with? Do women's work, go out and do men's? If life was not sweet for the unfortunate young woman in her mother's apartment, then here in general, she sometimes wanted to howl like a wolf. Mary stole almost everything. When Emma spoke about her pregnancy and that it was difficult for her to tolerate certain smells due to toxicosis, her mother-in-law went completely wild. Left alone with her daughter-in-law, Mary began to raise the young woman. Don't pretend in front of me. Why wasn't I pregnant? You know, they used to give birth in the field and nothing happened. They were all strong. Emma didn't have the strength to argue or prove anything. She almost constantly wanted to sleep. From a cheerful and active beauty, she turned into an amorphous creature with bags under her eyes. Emma understood that the pregnancy was not proceeding at all the way her mother went with Anne, and she was scared. She once complained to Ted. Irene from your paramedic midwife center told me that swelling is a variant of the norm. When I began to say that on the internet, it was advised to conduct an additional examination for such symptoms. She openly cursed me. I'm afraid Irene is being too careless about what I tell her. My symptoms are not the best. Take me to the antenatal clinic, at least in the nearest city. Hearing this, Mary could not stand it. Yes, our Irene has as much experience as you are. Since she said that you have a normal variant, that means it is so. That's right, she sent you. The simulator, the lady spoke on our head. If you don't trust Irene, go. The bus runs twice a day. You'll leave in the morning, come back in the evening, and Ted won't have to travel around, and the budget will remain the same. You didn't bring a penny into the house, but you're still trying to ride into heaven on our backs. Having shown concern in this way, the future grandmother went to one of her friends, and Emma, left alone with her husband, began to persuade. Ted, please, let's take me to the regional center. I feel that no amount of dill can help my condition. Why take the risk? The man could, but the woman somewhere on the cheek and promised, okay, I'll think of something. However, in the morning, when Emma woke up, her husband was no longer there. The woman got dressed and looked out into the car yard. The husband was also not there, and Mary Vasilievna was busy in the front garden. Me. Good morning, greeted Emma's mother-in-law. Do you happen to know when Ted will be back? Else, without looking up from what she was doing, Mary answers. By the evening, Helen will probably have some kind of incident at work. And he rushed there to help. It became so offensive that tears flowed from my eyes. Why didn't her husband wake her up? Although he knew that she needed to go to the regional center, she would get ready in an instant. More precisely, she had everything already prepared for attending the consultation. Having filled a bottle of water, Emma took her bag and, trying to calm down, headed to the gate. Are you going far? I need to collect carrots. Otherwise, according to the forecast, there will be a ton of rain next week. The mother-in-law's voice came from behind the woman. When you sit down at the table, you are in the first row, and how to help, you run from the yard. Emma turned around and, not holding back her tears, answered, I need to go to the hospital, where Ted, by the way, could very well have dropped me off. Or did you specifically dissuade him from leaving alone? And I was fiddling with carrots. Very thoughtful of you. Mary was angry. Oh, that's how you spoke. Here you have warmed up the snake, you impudent freeloader. Emma did not listen to what other insults her mother-in-law would come up with and headed to the bus stop so as not to miss the bus. The woman managed to get a paid appointment with a doctor only around lunchtime. As Emma assumed, additional tests were ordered, which they also could not take from her for free. However, the fairly young doctor conducting the appointment advised me, of course, I have no right to force you to urgently run and get tested at a paid center. However, when I was in your place, that's exactly what I did. Now I have a 5-year-old son thanks to the timely diagnosis of the problem and correctly prescribed treatment. It's scary to think what would have happened if everything had been different. Emma thanked the doctor and, leaving the consultation building, called her husband. Ted, I'm in the center now. Please, I'm coming. I may not have enough money because I still need to take paid tests. The doctor wasn't particularly frightening, but it seems there's no point in delaying it since I'm already here. That man did not consider it necessary to apologize for leaving in the morning without his wife, and was even indignant. Do you know where I can get this money? Am I printing them, do you think? Emma, hearing women's laughter and squeals in the background, as if someone was tickling someone, was so surprised that she even ignored her husband's rudeness. Ted, your mom said that you went to help your aunt, and you were having fun somewhere. How do we understand this in general? However, instead of an answer, beeps were heard from the phone. Upon further attempts to call Ted, the woman heard that the subscriber was unavailable. In the paid laboratory, a charming girl filling out documents asked if Emma had eaten, made a discount, and after drawing blood, she even poured hot tea and offered cookies. Emma, embarrassed, asked how much tea and cookies would cost, and the girl laughed merrily. What are you talking about? Everything is free. There are vases of more candy. True, they are tiny but very tasty. Take it, don't be shy. Emma modestly took a few things, and having learned that the next day the results would already be sent to the specified email, thanked Emma's girl, who showed much more concern for her than her mother-in-law and husband. As soon as the woman came out into the air, Ted calls. No, tell me where to go. I am free. Emma gave the address, and soon she was driving with her husband towards his village. The tired woman did not want to cause a scandal, and as a gesture of goodwill, she offered him some candy. Try me now in the laboratory, the girl from the reception treated me. The man, who was expecting a showdown, realized that the threat of a quarrel had passed and ate the sweet with pleasure. But Mary, as soon as Ted and Emma crossed the threshold of the house, began to throw thunder and lightning. Son, this is just a disgrace. Okay, you left to help Helen. It's a holy thing to never abandon a relative in trouble, but after you, this one also drove off to an unknown destination. Emma indignantly tried to defend herself. Actually, I told you and Ted that I was going to the regional hospital. By the way, I care about your grandson's health. The doctor said that tests need to be done and that swelling like mine is not normal. And elderly woman chuckles. These doctors just want to extract more money from simpletons. And in general, it is still unknown whose child you are carrying. I probably slept with half the boarding house staff. And you want to send it to Ted. Do you think your mother pulled off such a trick? And everything will go smoothly for you. Ted, get her out of my sight and immediately. Since you found her under the fence, let her go there. That's the place for your woman to walk. You will still find a good woman. And the sooner you remove this from your life, the better. Look, Andrew got confused with her mother. So what's the result? He lies quietly in the graveyard while Jane sheds tears. She is too soft and was unable to immediately return her son to her side. So I was left alone without support in my old age. I don't wish such a fate for you or myself. Emma's eyes darkened at such words from her mother-in-law, trying not to faint to the delight of her mother-in-law's gloating. The woman, slowly, leaning on the wall, began to move towards the bedroom. There were no tears, just pure fear caused by an unusual sensation. Her stomach was twisting somehow strangely, but Emma, with her feminine instinct, understood that it was not from hunger. Carefully, trying not to make sudden movements, she began to fold her. A few minutes later, Ted came into the room and began to persuade. Emma, why are you freaking out? Just think, Mom got excited. She doesn't really think so. Mom herself is now sitting in the kitchen, worried, drinking drops from her heart. Emma raised her head and looked at her husband. That's it, Ted. I've had enough of this family life. You know, when I had to run away from my home, I firmly promised myself that I would never tolerate insults. But for some reason, until today, I have repeatedly broken my vow. But that's not even the worst thing. I am terribly offended that you can never say a word in my defense. I should not have believed that I could become happy. As soon as Emma said these words, another painful spasm ran through her. In a dull voice, the woman ordered to get dressed. I feel bad, take me to the hospital. Mary, who, as it turned out, was not sitting in the kitchen but was eavesdropping on the couple's conversation, butted at me. Why are you pushing my son around? He has just arrived and must take you somewhere again. I won't let you in. By God, I won't let you in. Emma, realizing that arguing with her mother-in-law could be fatal, was already dialing the emergency number to call an ambulance. The 45 minutes while the doctors were driving became the longest in the woman's life. Sometimes the pain would go away for a while, and then she would continue to pack her things. When my insides again curled into a tight spring, I moved to a computer chair leaned back and tried, despite the desire to curl up sideways, to completely relax and breathe calmly and measuredly. Ted defied his mother and volunteered to accompany his wife to the hospital. Mary only managed to insist that her son ride not in his own car, but in an ambulance. Waking up after anesthesia, Emma felt terrible thirst and dizziness. Vision gradually became clearer, but the woman, looking around her life, saw empty beds in the corners like gray shadows. Emma blinked hard and, opening her eyes, noted with satisfaction they had disappeared. Gradually, the sounds returned. The woman heard someone walking along the corridor. Somewhere nearby, an elevator was making noise. Considering all sorts of devices that came into view, the specific smell of medicines and detergents, Emma concluded that the assumption turned out to be correct. Soon, a woman in a medical uniform entered, softened her lips with wet cotton wool, and greeted, "Welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Nothing. I'm just very dizzy," Emma answered hoarsely. "But it's normal. Narcosis is the thing. What is your name? Do you remember?" "Emma." "Wonderful name. Well, let's watch you here a little longer and then go to the room. You will have to stay under the supervision of a doctor for several days, and then home." "Excuse me, please, but what about my child?" Emma asked the most important question, but received a very evasive answer. "I'm just an anesthesiologist. The doctor will tell you everything in detail, don't worry." Emma nodded, causing everything to blur before her eyes, and it was as if she had fallen into a viscous, unnatural dream. After waking up again, she felt much better, although perhaps I wanted to drink even more. Before the woman had time to press the call button, a nurse came for her with a gurney. "Well, my dear, let's slowly come here like this, sideways, carefully. Now I'll take you to the ward." Emma was worried about the child. As soon as the doctor approached her and began asking questions about her well-being, the woman quietly asked, "How is my child?" Everything became clear from Emma's downcast eyes, as through the thickness of the water some terms reached her that she did not understand. At the end of the explanation, the doctor spoke words of consolation. "Operation was successfully completed. You will certainly be able to become a mother after the recovery period, of course. Everyone, rest. In the evening, be sure to come to the treatment room for an injection." The doctor left, and overcoming the urge to scream, Emma noticed her bag. Reaching out her hand, the woman took out the phone and dialed her husband's number. "Ted, listen to me and don't worry. Collect all my things and bring them to me at the hospital when I am discharged. I will inform you about the date and time later. Let's stop by, file for divorce, and you can be completely free." The man tried to say something, but Emma did not listen to him. The woman now considered escaping from her home, transferring to correspondence education, and insulting her mother-in-law to be completely insignificant events compared to loss of a child. Now Emma has decided to return to the apartment where Freddie and his son have settled and kicked them out. Whether mom likes it or not, they didn't want it in a good way, so we'll be in a right way. We still need to find out what crime George committed in order to expose this bastard. But this is after my head stopped spinning so hellishly. Instead of a few days in the hospital, she had to stay for a week, but Emma had time to think about everything. She rejected calls from her mother-in-law without accepting them. And when Mary tried to talk to her daughter-in-law from her son's phone, she cut off her lamentations. "You know what? Go under the fence yourself. And don't call me anymore." Berta did everything Emma asked, and didn't even try to talk her out of divorce. Only when he dropped the woman off near the station, he asked, "Emma, don't be angry with me and Mom. She didn't want this to happen. This is all a fatal accident." The woman didn't answer and didn't even slam the car door, although she really wanted to. Emma did not warn her mother about her return. And upon entering, I was surprised that there was no one in the apartment. On the one hand, this was very pleasing, but on the other, it was already almost 11 p.m., and Anne definitely had to be at home with someone. There was relative order in the bedroom that Emma shared with her younger sister, considering that there is a little girl living there. But in the other rooms, the woman noticed traces that looked like hasty preparations. Emma headed to the kitchen and automatically looked into the refrigerator. I was amazed that it was almost empty, so I put the kettle on. And then Mom and Anne entered the apartment. "Oh, daughter." Kate was delighted. "I'm so glad to see you," and grabbed her older sister by the legs and began to persuade her. "Don't leave anymore." Emma crouched down to hug the girl and began to calm her down. "Everything is fine. I won't go anywhere else." Later, when Emma read a book to her sister and the girl fell asleep, Kate apologized to her daughter. "May forgive me for everything. I'm sorry, you turned out to be right." Freddie and George got into bad business. Now they are in prison. An old crime committed by George was also revealed. The two women sat in the kitchen for a long time, shedding tears into their tea. And then Emma suggested, "Mom, let's sell this apartment and move somewhere far away. There are too many unpleasant memories here." Kate agreed. Soon, the mother and two daughters settled in a city 300 kilometers from their homeland. Emma transferred to a local university. I also met a nice single neighbor at the entrance. She no longer believed in the lightning-fast Emma and agreed to marry Pablo only a few years later. Kate, who, having married Freddie, ruined the lives of many close people, completely devoted herself to caring for Milana and the twins born to Emma and her husband.